Chapter 158. Slap. On the shore at night, Su Li slapped Ling Li indifferently. She didn't say anything and just took a deep look at his lips. Then she turned around and walked away. Her whole body was steaming like a fairy. She evaporated the river water in a few steps. She was no different from usual. Ling Li rubbed his cheeks and stroked his bitten lips with his fingertips. He stared at the beautiful figure in the distance with his starry eyes. From her violently heaving chest, he could see that she was not as indifferent and calm as she looked. That time in the yard in the valley, when she detoxified the poison for him, she took the initiative to kiss him. This time, he just wanted to cover his movement. But she bit his lips and slapped him hard. Why? There was a burning pain on his cheeks. Ling Li ran his vital energy to fade the red mark. The wound on his lips also scabbed. He turned around and went in the opposite direction instead of chasing Su Li. The night wind blew. Hierarch Ling's cold face flashed a slight smile. It seemed that he was slapped, but he was not angry. Instead, he was very happy. When Su Li returned to the Su house, Su Qingtan saw that she was tired. He stopped asking and let her have a good rest. Mammy Li had already boiled a whole bathtub of hot water and waited for Su Li to come back. Su Li took off her clothes and lay in the bathtub lazily. She closed her eyes and took a long breath. The scene under the river flashed in front of her eyes from time to time. She could still feel the touch on her lips. What a disappointment. Su Li sighed and got rid of the distractions in her mind. She made up her mind that she would never have anything to do with him in this life. She carefully avoided any possibility of meeting Ling Li, but she couldn't bear the fact that he took the initiative to see her. And she couldn't bear the strange coincidence. Mammy Li picked up the dirty clothes outside the screen. She felt strange when she held them in her hands. Why did the clothes seem to have just been washed? They were a little wrinkled. At the same time, in the Ling house, Ling Mo and Ling Xian stood aside quietly. Their eyes were focused on Ling Li's lips. Why did the master hurt his lips when he went to the banquet? What are you looking at? Even if Ling Li was calm enough, he couldn't bear being stared at by them for a quarter of an hour. He couldn't help but look up and said, "What are you looking at? Hurry up and reorganize the first prince's files." Ling Mo quickly became serious. He walked to the side and burned the outdated files. He said, "I didn't expect that Chu Lu of the Hongyang house was a member of the He Huan sect and she was with the first prince. If that's the case, we'll have to re-evaluate the first prince's influence." A voice came from outside the door. The door of the study was opened. It was Ling Qinglan who just came from the third prince. When Ling Qinglan entered the room, he saw the wound on Ling Li's lips and was shocked. "Your mouth. It's all because of your stupid idea." Ling Li stood up directly from the wheelchair. He pointed at Ling Qinglan's nose and scolded, "If you didn't ask me to pretend to be crazy to find Dongfang Sheng, I wouldn't have been scolded by that boor. He overturned my banquet table and I had to keep smiling." Although he didn't make it clear, Ling Li's words clearly meant that the first prince turned over the table and caused the injury on his lips. Pu. Ling Mo couldn't hold back his laughter. Ling Xian covered her mouth and didn't laugh. Ling Qinglan also couldn't help laughing and ridiculed, "Isn't it your strength to pretend to be crazy and silly? I made the best use of you. If you didn't endure humiliation, we couldn't get such important information." Ling Li looked at Ling Mo and said faintly, "Now, immediately, run 100 laps around the drill ground. Don't use your genuine qi." Ling Mo immediately smiled bitterly and said, "Why only me?" It was destined that no one would answer this question. He glanced at Ling Xian, who secretly gave him a gesture of encouragement, and then glanced at Ling Qinglan, who was full of encouragement. Finally, he went out of the study dejectedly. As soon as Ling Mo left, the three of them were relieved. Ling Xian and Ling Qinglan secretly thought that the master finally vented his anger. Poor Ling Mo. A certain someone thought to himself, "I've finally muddled my way through. How about Dongfang Lang?" Ling Li sat down again and calmed down. Ling Qinglan smiled slightly and said, "Of course, it's smooth. I think Dongfang Lang will praise this plan and trust me more tomorrow. After all, I've even used my own cousin this time." Ling Li's face darkened. Since Ling Qinglan joined them, Ling Qinglan had made fun of him a lot. But this time, Ling Qinglan even schemed against Su Li. Su Li was not a person who didn't take revenge. Ling Qinglan's life was still in her hands. Ling Qinglan would regret in the future. Ling Li laughed in his heart but didn't show any clue on the surface. After they talked for a while, Ling Qinglan left. Nothing happened that night. The next day, the sky was dark and it seemed that it was going to rain heavily. There were few pedestrians on the street. Few people were willing to go out in this weather. Mammy Li thoughtfully prepared an umbrella for Su Li. Su Li took it and was about to go out. Su Zipei came in from the door and said, "Second sister, father said that the restaurant is not busy today. He wants you to see the boiler." Su Zipei seemed to be afraid of Su Qingtan's lesson. She didn't make trouble for Su Li for several days. She stayed at home and only went out to buy medicine for her mother. Today was not the day to buy medicine for Zhu Yang. Su Li's eyes dimmed. She pretended to be surprised and said, "Father said that I don't need to go to the restaurant." Why? Su Zipei was a little flustered. She forced herself to calm down and said, "How do I know? That's what father said. I'm going to take care of my mother." With that, Su Zipei turned around and ran into the courtyard. It was obvious that she was running for her life. Su Li pondered for a moment and sat in the carriage. Under the coachman's inquiring eyes, she smiled sweetly and said, "Go to the Baiwei building." After an hour and a half, the carriage stopped in front of the Baiwei building. The business was not as poor as Su Zipei said. On rainy days, many people had nothing to do, so more people came to enjoy delicious food. Su Huanli was very busy. When he suddenly saw Su Li, he didn't doubt her. He immediately pulled her and told her quickly, "You come just in time. Several boilers are not working well. Go and have a look." Su Huanli nodded. Su Li was stunned. Did Su Zipei really come to the Baiwei building in the morning? Could it be that she had been overly sensitive recently and was overthinking things? Being pushed into the kitchen, Su Li saw several boilers were overused. She quickly called several helpers to start refurbishing them. At this moment, Master Ma Ling sneaked into the building with a few henchmen. They glanced around and didn't see Su Li. They immediately breathed a sigh of relief and found an empty seat to sit down. "Give me a plate of the signature dishes of your inn. I'm not short of money." Ma Ling stretched out his hand and slapped an ingot of silver on the table. The waiter immediately went to the kitchen to serve them. "Master, I heard that the dishes of the Baiwei building are delicious." "Do we really?" One of the henchmen leaned over and whispered. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Ma Ling immediately knocked him on the head and scolded in a low voice, "Useless thing. As long as this thing is done, we can all get rid of the affiliated school and become real students of the National Academy. That is the talent of the National Academy. It is impossible for him to lie." The henchman shrank his neck. It seemed that he was attracted by the prospect that Ma Ling said and no longer refuted. "But before that, let me taste the taste of the beggar's chicken. I won't be able to eat this dish in the future." Ma Ling smiled and didn't eat immediately. He waited until all the dishes were served. After eating and drinking, he secretly took out a white sandalwood and lit it. Then he put it under the table. Today's wind happened to blow into the restaurant. In the snickering of Ma Ling and others, the colorless and odorless smoke floated all over the Baiwei building. At this moment, Su Li, who was repairing the boiler in the kitchen, didn't notice it at all. After a while, there was a burst of wailing in the restaurant. "Ah, my stomach hurts. What's the matter? I feel dizzy." Plop. A fat man who had eaten many plates of the beggar's chicken suddenly foamed at the mouth. He slid down the chair and lay on the ground, twitching violently. Others were shocked. "Don't eat. There is something wrong with today's dishes." The whole Baiwei building was suddenly in chaos. More and more people fell down and foamed at the mouth. Some people staggered to the street. Finally, they turned their eyes and lay directly on the road. This strange scene immediately attracted the attention of the passers-by outside. In less than 10 breaths of time, a large group of people had gathered around. Seeing that the situation was not good, the waiters finally shouted in panic, Master, it's not good. All the guests are vomiting. Su Huanli looked at the guests lying on the ground. At this moment, his mind was blank. The Baiwei building had been open for several months. How could it suddenly become like this? Hearing the noise, Su Li immediately put down her work and rushed to the front hall. Seeing such a tragic scene, she couldn't help but shrink her pupils. She swept to the front of the nearest person who fell down. She put her hand on the pulse and felt a little numb. He was poisoned, and it was highly toxic. There were so many people. The antidote she brought was not enough at all. Father, it's not too late. Immediately send them to the clinic for detoxification. Otherwise, we can't afford to bear the responsibility if they all die. Su Li said hurriedly. She had rushed to the side of several people with the most severe symptoms of poisoning. She took out several silver needles she carried with her to suppress the toxins. Su Huanli was at a loss at this moment. Hearing Su Li's words, he immediately ordered the waiters to go to the clinic to call people. The waiters realized that the Baiwei building was in a big trouble. If all these people died in the restaurant, they couldn't escape the blame. Hearing Su Huanli's order, they immediately pushed away the wall of onlookers and ran wildly. Fortunately, the location of the Baiwei building was excellent. It was not far from the clinic. Soon, the waiters got a large group of people from the clinic to help. Su Li breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, she glimpsed a person who fell beside the door of the Baiwei building. Her pupils shrank violently. She crossed the distance in 2 or 3 steps and came to the person. Seeing the person's face, Su Li narrowed her eyes and various thoughts passed through her mind. This was Ma Ling, the only son of the minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Chapter 159. Such a big accident happened in the Baiwei building. Fan Dechang, the officer of the Ministry of the capital city, responded very quickly. He immediately sent people to block the Baiwei building. But when Fan Dechang saw Ma Ling and a group of rich disciples who followed him died in the shop, he turned around and ran away without saying anything. The son of the minister of the Ministry of Revenue was dead, and so were the eldest sons of the rich and powerful families. It was a hot potato. If he didn't do it well, he would lose his official position. It was a big matter. He couldn't manage it. Ling Qinglan of the Supreme Judiciary and Chen Gong of the Ministry of Penalty were not afraid of trouble. He was old and it was better not to get involved. Lord, don't go. I'm wronged. Seeing that Fan Dechang just came and left, Su Huanli didn't have time to say a word. He hurriedly chased after him, but was stopped by the officer of the Ministry of Penalty. Under the attack of the officer of the Ministry of Penalty, he couldn't act rashly. He could only raise his hands in panic and slowly retreat. Su Li stood aside with light in her eyes. She didn't check the cause of death of Ma Ling and others. It was meaningless. All the money of Ma Ling and others disappeared. It was obvious that someone erased all the traces under the guise of theft. It was difficult to find out anything. Soon, the people of the Supreme Judiciary and the Ministry of Penalty arrived. Fan Dechang was very tactful. He didn't want to offend anyone. At the same time, he sent the news to the people of both sides. Ling Qinglan and Chen Gong met in front of the Baiwei building. Their expressions remained unchanged, but their eyes changed. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. The Supreme Judiciary and the Ministry of Penalty were in charge of major cases. They competed fiercely and had a bad relationship. Ling Qinglan sighed in his heart and immediately said with a smile, Lord Chen, you are busy with old cases. How about handing over the case of the Baiwei building to me? Chen Gong said with a cold face and an indifferent voice, the Ministry of Penalty will deal with this matter. You, the Supreme Judiciary, should avoid arousing suspicion. Ling Qinglan's smile slowly disappeared. This old guy really didn't give him any face. Su Qingtan, why are all the recent major cases related to you? Thinking of this, he took a step back and bowed to salute. He said loudly, Lord Chen, there must be injustice in this case. Please don't punish them, lest they make a big mistake. Chen Gong snorted and stepped into the Baiwei building without looking back. Ling Qinglan waved his hand and motioned them to go back. His confidant behind him couldn't help but transmit the sound in silence. Lord, Are we just going to leave like this? Ling Qinglan raised his eyebrows and said, otherwise? This is related to Su Qingtan. Even if I snatch the case from Chen Gong and find out the real murderer, I will not be able to convince the public. I've already said what I need to say. The rest is up to the Su family's luck. While talking, Su Li's delicate figure flashed in Ling Qinglan's mind. He couldn't help but click his tongue. He only hoped that the girl could hold on. The means of the Ministry of Penalty were not easy. Su Li was not surprised to see Chen Gong come in. It would be strange if the Supreme Judiciary could receive this case. Chen Gong bent down to check the corpses of Ma Ling and others. Then he stood up and glanced at Su Huanli and other waiters who were so scared that they almost wet their pants. Finally, his eyes stayed on Su Li for a moment and he said coldly, take all the people of the Baiwei building into custody and send them to the Ministry of Penalty for interrogation. Take all the corpses away and hand them over to the coroner to find out the cause of death. Block the Baiwei building. No irrelevant person is allowed to approach during the investigation period. The Ministry of Penalty immediately took action after the cold orders were given. The business of the EE building diagonally across the street finally improved. Wu Xiuxiu stood in front of the windowsill on the second floor and watched the people of the Ministry of Penalty leave with Su Li and others. She couldn't help but doubt. Brother, it's Chen Gong. Wu Jin smiled slightly and played with the unburned sandalwood in his hand. He said, without this thing, who can think that Ma Ling and others poisoned themselves? They are also the culprits of poisoning the Baiwei building. Even if Chen Gong is resourceful and can trace it to me, he can't arrest the descendants of the Wu family without evidence. Then, Wu Jin gently folded the half-burned sandalwood in his hand and instantly pinched it into powder. Wu Xiuxiu looked at her arrogant and high-spirited brother. Her eyes flashed with obsession. If she was not her brother's sister, how good it would be, in the prison of the Ministry of Penalty. All the people of the Baiwei building were detained separately, including the waiters. Su Li was in a mixed women's cell, in which more than a dozen female prisoners in dirty white prison uniforms were locked up. Seeing that a newcomer came in and hadn't changed into a prisoner's uniform, several female prisoners' eyes immediately lit up and they rushed to Su Li crazily. These people had been locked up for a long time and were delirious. They were all crazy. Su Li frowned and dodged. She slightly slapped away several female prisoners who went too far and touched their wounds. They screamed and finally came to their senses. They shrank in the corner again and looked at Su Li with fear and undisguised hatred. I didn't expect that you are a martial artist. Little girl, do you know what it means to expose your cultivation in the Ministry of Penalty? The grey-haired old woman squatting in the innermost room sneered. Her voice was as harsh as a night owl. Ha 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 ha. The rest of the female prisoners immediately laughed with the old woman. Su Li slightly pursed her thin lips and gradually narrowed her eyes. In her previous life, she was imprisoned in the water dungeon of the Ministry of Penalty for a year. How could she know the fate of warriors in the Ministry of Penalty? However, even if she didn't expose her cultivation, her identity had already been known in Yunjing City. How could the disciple of the royal preceptor have no cultivation? Suddenly, there were two footsteps in the cold dungeon. Although the conversation was light, Su Li still heard it clearly. Hey, 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 after a slightly perverted laugh, he said, I haven't seen a virgin being tortured for a long time. This is a good job. Laro Wu, why don't you give this job to me? Bullshit. I have been waiting for this moment for 10 years. You want to exchange with me? Go away. Su Li's eyes gradually became cold. She was careless. After all, Yunjing was Yunjing. She knew that someone would deal with her, but when it really happened, she couldn't think of a way to deal with it. Although the Ministry of Penalty was heavily guarded, it was absolutely easy for her to escape if she wanted to. But she couldn't escape. If she escaped, the sin of the Baiwei building would definitely be put on her head. Her eldest brother would also be implicated by her and his career would be ruined. She had such regrets in her previous life. In this life, she absolutely didn't want to see it. Who is Su Li? Come out to be interrogated. While she was thinking, two jailers who specialized in execution appeared in front of the dungeon with their eyes shining. Su Li was arrested by the Ministry of Penalty. Seeing the news from Ling Qinglan, Ling Li's expression changed slightly. Ling Xian was also worried. If the woman died in the Ministry of Penalty, no one could save Ling Qinglan's injury. Why don't I go there? Ling Mo was nervous. He knew the relationship between the master and Su Li. It was absolutely not as estranged as it seemed. No. Ling Li reached out to turn the switch on the wall. He took out a set of casual clothes and a mask and turned away. He said, "Your figure has been exposed last time. Just in case, I will go in person." Ling Xian watched Ling Li leave in a daze. Was Master's nervousness the same as hers? Ling Mo glanced at her cautiously and didn't dare to say more. The three people in the room had their own thoughts. Ling Qinglan was the most confused. Who was Su Li to Ling Li? Why was everyone nervous when they heard that Su Li had an accident? Was there any secret that he didn't know? Ling Qinglan thought for a few years. He patted the fan in his hand and became serious. Finally, he didn't ask more questions. With his broken body, he could live for at most half a year. What could he do if he knew it? Back to the Supreme Judiciary, Ling Qinglan entered the study and saw Su Qingtan, who seemed to have been waiting for him for a long time. "Lord, how are my sister and others?" Su Qingtan clenched his fists. He had heard it from people who came back, but he still wanted to get confirmation from Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan raised his eyebrows and said lightly, "It's not a big deal to be imprisoned by the Ministry of Penalty. After all, the matter has not been investigated. Your father will be fine, but your sister may be." Hearing the second half of the sentence, Su Qingtan's heart seemed to be twisted fiercely. He felt suffocated and said, "My second sister. What will happen to her?" Ling Qinglan smiled and said, "It seems that you are not surprised that Qi Xianqing is your sister's master. You should have seen Qi Xianqing, so you should know that Qi Xianqing is not a simple royal preceptor. He is also a powerful man who has reached the peak of the inborn realm. Do you think that he will not teach his disciple Shengong?" Su Qingtan's pupils shrank slightly. "You mean, but the second sister never showed any martial arts in front of him. She didn't look like a person who knew Shengong at all." Ling Qinglan sneered unabashedly, "Su Li's cultivation has reached the acquired 8th hurdle. As her elder brother, your cultivation is not as good as her." "Tut tut." Su Qingtan's face turned red because he was humiliated. He growled, "Don't say it." Ling Qinglan was not angry. He knocked on the table with his fingers and said, "But in the future, after your sister suffers the punishment of piercing the bones, you still have many chances to surpass her." "Piercing the bones?" Su Qingtan's face turned pale. He stepped forward and grasped the edge of the table tightly. He roared, "Why does she have to be pierced the bones? Isn't she not convicted? Does the Ministry of Penalty dare to punish the disciple of the royal preceptor? If you have time to be angry with me, why don't you go to your idol to have a try?" Ling Qinglan stopped smiling. There was a strong pressure out of nowhere, which made Su Qingtan feel that he was facing the world. He said, "Unfortunately, the rule that warriors have to be pierced the bones when they enter the Ministry of Penalty is set by Lord Chengong, whom you worship." Su Qingtan held his breath. When he thought that his second sister, who had suffered a lot since childhood, finally had a few happy days, she had to suffer inhumane punishment. He was so distressed that he trembled all over. Why wasn't he the one who was punished? Taking a deep breath, Su Qingtan's eyes became gloomy. He said, "Ling Qinglan, last time you said that there was a way to make me stronger quickly. No matter what the price is, I promise you." Chapter 160. Enmore Cult. It sounded familiar. Su Qingtan frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he was shocked. Wasn't it the Enmore cult that the Dahan dynasty had been afraid of and wanted to exterminate? Ling Qinglan turned out to be a member of the Enmore cult. At the same time, he was the minister of the Supreme Judiciary. Su Qingtan felt a sense of trembling in his heart. How many people wanted Ling Qinglan, who had a clean background, to be a high official in the Dahan dynasty? Not to mention anything else, the Supreme Judiciary must have been infiltrated by Ling Qinglan a lot, and he would become one of them today. Suddenly, Su Qingtan felt that his shoulder was patted. His uncertain eyes suddenly focused and he returned to his own situation. Ling Qinglan's smile was as elegant as usual. But today, in Su Qingtan's eyes, it was evil. Don't panic. The Enmore cult is not as terrible as you think. The Dahan dynasty is afraid of it and deliberately vilifies it. In recent years, we have been the scapegoat for the Dongfang family a lot. Then why is it still called the Enmore cult? Su Qingtan stared at Ling Qinglan. If he didn't agree today, he would not leave the study. It was better to inquire more about the Enmore cult, pretend to join it, and then wait for the opportunity. Ling Qinglan's slender fingers tapped the table gently. The crisp sound fell into Su Qingtan's ears. It seemed that his heart was gently grasped. Every tap made his heart beat strangely and his blood flow was not smooth. Su Qingtan groaned and knelt on the ground. At this time, Ling Qinglan's voice sounded. Su Qingtan, in the future, you will be a member of the Enmore cult, and I will be your master. Don't talk to me in this tone. Do you know? I will ask Ling Shuyi to teach you later. Since it's your first offense, I will spare you this time. His fingers loosened, and the voice disappeared. Su Qingtan breathed a sigh of relief and collapsed on the ground like a dog. Ling Qinglan, who used to be a strict but good teacher in his eyes, had already become a very terrible evil figure. As for the Enmore cult, the hierarch didn't want to establish it. But there is karma. Since people call it evil, then it is evil. The so-called decent is just a gold brick that those sanctimonious hypocrites put on their faces. It is not rare. It seemed that Ling Qinglan explained clearly, but it seemed that he didn't explain anything. Su Qingtan was silent for a while. Ling Qinglan asked him whether he joined the cult or not, but he got a lot of doctrines. It turned out that Ling Qinglan said Enmore cult. He had become a member of the Enmore cult and had no right to choose. For the sake of our friendship in the past, I will personally teach you Shen Qi as a way to fulfill my promise to you. However, if I'm not satisfied with your cultivation progress, I'll personally cripple you so that I won't lose face. After saying that, he extended his hand and threw out a rubbing booklet. This is a superior Shen Gong. I don't ask you to understand much when you go back, but remember to memorize it and burn it. I don't need to say more about the preciousness of Shen Gong, right? Looking at the booklet lying quietly on the ground, Su Qingtan took a deep breath and suppressed the throbbing in his eyes. After he entered Yunjing, he knew that Shen Gong was not taught to outsiders. What he learned in the Supreme Judiciary was just the most common third-rate Shen Gong. If he didn't learn from his family, he had no chance to learn those advanced Shen Gong. Now, the superior Shen Gong that he had been dreaming of was in front of him, but he couldn't feel any joy in his heart. Instead, he was deeply confused. He didn't know whether it was right or wrong to do so. Su Qingtan picked up the booklet and stood up. He hesitated for a moment and ended the meeting in the way of the Supreme Judiciary. I'll leave first. Seeing Su Qingtan leave, Ling Qinglan's eyes became cold and apologetic in the blink of an eye. The middle-aged guard beside him, who had been like a sculpture, finally came to life. He gestured to Ling Qinglan that he didn't need to do this. Ling Qinglan smiled and said, "Is it too much? The more I go too far now, the guiltier he will be after I leave. That guilt can firmly restrain him and let him stay in the Enmore cult to take over my position. Moreover, I don't have time to explain. It's better to let him obediently accept everything I arrange." The middle-aged guard was stunned. He shook his head and gestured again. "You didn't tell the hierarch about it, but you acted on your own. At that time, that mess will be left to Ling Li to clean up. I don't care so much." Ling Qinglan patted the paper fan and stood up. He looked calm and said, "Let's go and continue to try the case. After that, I can continue to investigate the matter of the Yi family." On the way to the dungeon, the chains of the shackles clanked when they touched the ground. Su Li looked down at the ground. In the impatient words of the two jailers, she walked more and more slowly. The smell of blood was getting stronger and stronger. "Didn't you eat? Go faster. If the emperor breaks the law, he will be punished the same as the common people. What's more, you are just a common person with an undeserved reputation. Do you think that someone will come to save you?" Su Li was suddenly pushed by the jailer. She staggered out. The shackles on her feet were too short. Finally, she failed to stabilize her body and lay on the ground. The tip of her nose and arms were rubbed with blood. Ha 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 ha, what a quiet eighth hurdle. You are still the same. You are so weak. The two jailers gloated and laughed. Her pupils were gloomy and she slowly got up. Although the shackles were made of black iron and could trap any warrior below the peak of the acquired realm, they couldn't trap her. The shackles under her feet were as fragile as tofu for her. They would be broken if she exerted a little strength. But she couldn't do that. If she did that, it would be equal to announcing to the world that she had already been a senior of the inborn realm. In that case, the things in the Qinghe town would be unexplainable and there would be more troubles. Su Li frowned when she stood up and walked 2 steps. She finally arrived at the torture chamber. The 2 jailers walked in with Su Li. Suddenly, they saw a person sitting on the table next to the torture instruments. They were shocked and immediately went forward. "Lord, why are you here?" Chen Gong glanced at Su Li, who was covered with bruises. He was expressionless. He turned to the 2 jailers who came over and slapped them. Clap, clap. The 2 jailers turned 3 times and fell to the ground with great force. They spat out 2 or 3 teeth and their mouths were full of blood. But they were not angry. Instead, they were all frightened. They didn't have time to pick up their teeth. They got up and crawled to Chen Gong and kowtowed again and again. "I know I'm wrong. I know I'm wrong." They didn't know what they had done wrong. But countless previous examples told them that what they should do now was to kneel down and kowtow to apologize in front of the temperamental Chen Gong. Chen Gong took off the key rings from their waists, stretched out his legs and kicked them away. He said coldly, "Get out." The 2 jailers felt that they were pardoned. They immediately got up and left the torture chamber. One of them lamented in his heart. He should have thought of it. Of course, Lord Chen liked to do such a good job by himself. He was asking for trouble. Only Chen Gong and Su Li were left in the torture room. Seeing that Su Li bowed her head and didn't speak, Chen Gong looked a little relaxed. He pulled Su Li in front of him and bent down to untie the handcuffs and ankle cuffs for her. Then he took out a jailer's clothes and put them in front of Su Li. "Put them on and follow me." Su Li took over the clothes and was stunned. Although Chen Gong had saved her before, it didn't mean that she had a deep relationship with Chen Gong. She never thought that Chen Gong would play favoritism for her. But how could she explain the scene in front of her? Chen Gong put the shackles back to the original position and said without looking back, "Put them on quickly. The dungeon is humid. Let's go out first." Putting on the jailer's clothes and the official hat, Su Li lowered her head. Chen Gong nodded and covered her eyebrows and eyes with the official hat. In this way, no one in the Ministry of Penalty would think that she was a criminal if she followed him. Even if Su Li went out with him openly, no one dared to stop her. So, Chen Gong chose a milder way. Pushing open the dungeon door, Chen Gong walked up as usual. Su Li followed him and passed by an inconspicuous jailer. She suddenly felt something strange and looked back, only to see the figure disappear at the entrance of the dungeon. Who was that? She should have no acquaintance in the Ministry of Penalty. "Don't look around. Follow me." Hearing Chen Gong's order, Su Li could only suppress her doubts and followed him to a quiet room. Pushing the door and entering, Su Li smelled rotten. It was a morgue. At a glance, Su Li saw Ma Ling and others alone. Why did Chen Gong bring her here? Obviously, the people in the room had been cleared out by Chen Gong in advance. He took Su Li to Ma Ling's body and said, "You are the apprentice of Qi Xianqing. You must have extraordinary insight in medical circle. The coroner of the Ministry of Penalty is an ordinary person after all. He can't be compared with the martial arts circle. Can you check and see if you can find anything?" Su Li hesitated and said, "I am a sinner. How can I?" Chen Gong raised his eyebrows and said in a low voice, "Just check. Don't talk so much nonsense." Su Li seemed to be scared and hurriedly went to Ma Ling's body to check. Seeing that she quickly got into the mood, Chen Gong praised her in his heart. She deserved to be the apprentice of the miracle-working doctor. He found a chair and sat down. Looking at Su Li's charming back, even the jailer's clothes couldn't hide her lovely temperament. He was gradually in a trance. He used to hate and be crazy. He vented all his resentment on the prisoners. Then, he got the name of a cruel official. Others said that he was ruthless and didn't recognize his relatives when he handled a case. Whether he was right or wrong, he would punish him first. But it was obvious that Su Li took the blame for someone else. He had been an official for many years. How could he not even see this clue? What's more, for Su Li, who was not much different from his daughter, he couldn't do it. Cheng Jun, it should be right for me to do this. Thinking of his wife's voice and smile, Chen Gong had all kinds of complex thoughts in his heart. Finally, he sighed deeply. The empty torture room. The jailer, who looked like a teenager, was so fast that he seemed to be divided into several shadows. He quickly checked all the scaffolds. There is no new blood. Ling Li's eyes flashed. That was to say, Su Li was not tortured. But he searched the whole cell and found no trace of Su Li. Where was she taken? Pulling the brim of the hat, Ling Li suddenly remembered the gaze staring at him from behind before he came in. That was Su Li. Su Li didn't hide her pneuma. As long as he paid a little attention, he could detect her. At that time, he was concerned about the dungeon and ignored it. Now he was sure that it was Su Li. Su Li changed into the jailer's clothes and was taken away by Chen Gong. Chen Gong saved her before. Ling Li frowned slightly. Was there any relationship between them that he didn't know? Chapter 161. After an hour, Su Li finally checked the death of Ma Ling and the other 4 people. Lord Chen, the cause of death of Ma Ling and the other 4 people is the same. They were all poisoned. I may need to go back to the affiliated school to do a test. But one thing is clear. The poison in their bodies is different from that of the guests in the restaurant. It is a more sophisticated mixed poison. A mixed poison different from that of the guests in the restaurant. Chen Gong raised his eyebrows slightly. Finally, he heard a key point that was different from what the coroner said. Yes. Su Li took off her gloves and came to Chen Gong. She said carefully, when I helped others to suppress the poison in the restaurant that day, I found that the poison was fierce but not immediately fatal. But Ma Ling and the other 4 people were poisoned by the throat-sealing poison. There was no time to rescue them. That is to say, someone wanted them to die immediately. Dead people tell no tales. Chen Gong's eyes flickered. What was the reason that Ma Ling and the other 4 people were killed immediately without saying a word? Ma Ling was not a small figure. He was the only son of the minister of the Ministry of Revenue. If he was not famous and adhered to the rules, Ma Weiming would have come to the Ministry of Penalty and asked him to punish the Su family immediately. However, Chen Gong heard that Ma Weiming had told the matter to the emperor. If he didn't hurry to find out the truth, Su Li would be in danger. People thought that the emperor and the royal preceptor were as close as father and son. But only Chen Gong knew that the relationship between the emperor and the royal preceptor was not harmonious. On the contrary, the emperor was only afraid of Qi Xianqing. Otherwise, how could Qi Xianqing not stay in Yunjing? He clearly knew that if he appeared, the emperor would be stimulated. But why did he frequently send disciples to Yunjing? This was the only thing he was confused about. Lord Chen? Su Li called him. Chen Gong came to his sense and got rid of distractions. He said, in this case, I will accompany you to the affiliated school. However, if the behind-the-scenes manipulator is really prepared, I am afraid that the affiliated school. Lord Chen, don't worry. The affiliated school will be fine. But my current identity. Su Li glanced at her nondescript clothes helplessly. A rare smile appeared on Chen Gong's face. He took out a good-quality disguise pill and said, you can be my assistant for the time being and help me solve the case. Su Li was surprised. The grade of disguise elixir given by Chen Gong was not low. At least, it could hide from the eyes of warriors below the inborn realm. The value of this elixir was very high. Lord Chen, there's no need for that. Su Li ran the secret method, and her face changed into another person. My master taught me the secret method of disguise, and now it comes in handy. This time, it was Chen Gong's turn to be stunned. Qi Xianqing must have taught her that the secret method of disguise could not be easily shown to others. Did she trust him so much? For a moment, Chen Gong's thoughts became more complicated. When Ling Li came back, Ling Mo saw that there was no one behind him, so he felt strange. Could it be that even the master couldn't enter the Ministry of Penalty now? Young master, before Ling Mo asked, Ling Li waved his hand and interrupted him. He changed his clothes and sat back in the wheelchair. He rubbed his chin and said strangely, Ling Mo, what do you think can move Chen Gong's heart? Ling Mo was slightly stunned. He didn't understand why the master suddenly asked this, but he still replied, probably not. Do you remember that Chen Gong's uncle committed a crime a few years ago? Chen Gong was cold-hearted and didn't show any mercy. He tortured Chen Gong to death and confessed. After this incident, Chen Gong truly became a loner. All of his relatives refused to contact him even if they died. Even family affection couldn't move him. Is there anything else that can surpass family affection? What you said is reasonable, so it is more strange. Ling Li rubbed his lips with his fingers and said, why did Chen Gong only treat Su Li differently and even violate his own principles to rescue her from the dungeon? Hearing this, Ling Mo and Ling Xian were both shocked. If Ling Li didn't say it himself, they even thought that someone was joking. Ling Xian's eyes flashed with wisdom and she said softly, young master, Chen Gong's past has always been vague. No one knows what he experienced in the past to become like this. Maybe he doesn't want to mention it. But even the Tianya house can't find it. It is unreasonable. It is very likely that Su Li really has a secret relationship with Chen Gong. Su Li seems to have a clean background, but all kinds of signs show that her background is not simple. Young master, when you contact with her, you should be careful. Ling Li frowned and a light flashed in his eyes. He ordered in a low voice, use the spies of the Ministry of Penalty to investigate all the cases related to the Chen Palace. Since the Supreme Judiciary can't be found, the Ministry of Penalty is his territory. He should leave some clues. Ling Xian was shocked and said repeatedly, young master, it is not easy to cultivate spies. Once exposed, it is easy to alert the enemy. Just for Chen Gong, it is really. Ling Xian. Ling Mo suddenly interrupted her with a cold voice. Ling Xian's face changed slightly and her heart thumped. She immediately looked up and saw a frosty face. She felt more bitter in her heart. She didn't realize it and violated the taboo of the young master. Xian, how many years have you been with me? Ling Li said lightly, which made Ling Xian panic. She bowed her head and said obediently, young master, you picked me up when you were 7 years old. It has been 10 years. 10 years. Haven't you learned the rules of staying with me? Ling Xian's eyes were full of tears when she heard Ling Li's increasingly severe tone. She said aggrievedly, I know I am wrong. I am also worried about you. I accidentally. Please punish me, young master. Ling Li looked indifferent. He closed his eyes and waved his hand, the punishment is the same as before. Go out. Ling Xian was slightly happy and immediately went out of the study. As long as she could get the forgiveness of the young master, she was willing to run 1,000 or 10,000 laps, let alone 100 laps. Except for Ling Li, there was only Ling Mo in the room. Ling Mo glanced at Ling Xian who was running crazily on the martial arts field. He couldn't help but be speechless. He turned back and said, young master, I am afraid that Ling Xian. Ling Li looked a little annoyed. Ling Mo immediately swallowed the second half of the sentence. Ling Li closed the file and a trace of tiredness flashed through his eyebrows. He said, why did she do that? The Ling mansion is a dangerous place. Second brother and I both know it. We won't let any woman suffer after entering the Ling mansion. Even if you. Young master. Ling Mo stood straight and his eyes were as firm as a rock. He said, I am the sword in the hand of the young master. Where I am, the sword is. If the man died, the sword would die. The second half of the sentence sounded in his heart. His life was given by the young master. If the young master died, he would definitely follow the young master without any hesitation. Seeing Ling Mo like this, Ling Li was even more worried. All of them were like this. If they were all like Su Li, avoiding him as if he was a plague, he would worry a lot less. No, that was not good. When he thought of Su Li's face, which was full of smiles to everyone but him, he couldn't help but hate her. Did he owe her in his previous life? Even if he was a playboy, his appearance was not ugly. His family was a super rich and powerful family in Yunjing. Why did she hate him so much? It was just a kiss forced by the situation. Did she have to slap him so hard? Looking at the uncertain expression of the young master, Ling Mo consciously retreated and closed the door. It was better to stay away from the young master in this state. In the affiliated school of the National Academy. Without Su Li, the affiliated school was not as lively as imagined. Ma Ling was also the top playboy in Yunjing. Now he suddenly died. Everyone was in danger. Many young masters hid at home and didn't dare to go out. Chen Gong pushed the door and walked in with Su Li. He saw a fat man sitting in the school and staring blankly at the teacher's desk. Chen Gong didn't expect that someone dared to stay here. He couldn't help but be stunned. Then he was more surprised when he saw the face of the latter. The first master of the Tang family, Tang Lei, was known to be weak. He was one of the 3 useless people in Yunjing. It seemed that he was not as timid and weak as the rumor said. Su Li was surprised when she saw him. Today, Tang Lei was completely different from the liveliness on the first day. There were 2 dark eye sockets on his round face. He exuded the lethargy of an old man. He was dying. When Chen Gong approached, he also noticed that Tang Lei was in a bad state. He immediately became serious. Tang Lei heard the noise and looked at the door. When he saw that it was Chen Gong, his joy immediately turned into panic. He didn't expect that he waited here for 3 days. Instead of Su Li, the most terrible person in Yunjing City came. Lord Chen, I'm Tang Tang Tang. Tang Lei stammered for a long time, but he didn't say his name. He was so anxious that he almost cried. I'm going. Then, he was about to rush past Chen Gong. But Chen Gong grabbed his back collar and said sternly, "Stop. You can't go anywhere today." Tang Lei was very flustered. When he thought of the inhumane means of Chen Gong in the rumor, he was so scared that he almost cried. Chen Gong shook his head again and again. The rumor was true. No wonder that person called him a rotten wall that can't hold up the mud. He slowed down and asked, "I won't catch you. What are you doing here? Tell me the truth." Tang Lei was caught by Chen Gong, but he couldn't escape. He could only accept his fate and said obediently, "I come here because, to find Lecturer Su. I want to ask her if there is any more of the medicine she gave me." "What?" Tang Lei sighed and said weakly, "The medicine that Lecturer Su gave me made me suffer a lot, but it's not a big deal. But after a while, I felt heavier. Especially recently, I could sleep very well. But my eye sockets were dark. It seemed that I didn't sleep at all. I was so scared. After thinking about it, I could only come here to find Lecturer Su." Chen Gong was slightly moved. He turned to look at Su Li beside him, but Su Li looked more serious than him. She said, "What unusual things have you eaten recently? Or, where have you been?" Tang Lei was extremely gentle. Although Su Li dressed like a jailer, he didn't feel insulted when she asked him. Instead, he thought about it seriously and murmured, "I haven't been anywhere. Brother Li has been fascinated by Lecturer Su recently. He always said that he would study at home to increase his talent. I have no place to go, so I stay at home. But I seem to eat more than before." Su Li's eyes flashed. She grabbed Tang Lei's fat wrist. A green light that couldn't be detected by people of the inborn realm flowed into Tang Lei's body along the tendons and vessels. Ouch! Tang Lei immediately squatted down holding his belly and farted several times. Ignoring Chen Gong, he immediately ran to the latrine pit. Chen Gong frowned and waved his hand to disperse the stench. It was not like, but a rotten smell of a corpse. "Su Li, what's wrong with him? What did you give him before?" Su Li didn't hide it. She told Chen Gong what she found when she met Tang Lei for the first time. Chen Gong frowned. In this way, someone wanted to kill Tang Lei secretly. But Su Li's means seemed to alarm him, so he accelerated the speed of killing Tang Lei. Chapter 162. After waiting for a long time, they saw Tang Lei walk over with a weak face, clutching his stomach. Although his face was pale, the dark circles under his eyes had obviously faded, and the death chi on his body had dissipated a lot. At least, he didn't look like he was about to die. Chen Gong was surprised. He only saw Su Li feel Tang Lei's pulse without using other means, but she could make Tang Lei get better quickly. Her medical attainments were not much worse than Qi Shenqing's. No wonder Qi Xianqing would accept her as his last disciple. Su Li stretched out her hand to Tang Lei again. Tang Lei showed a look of fear. His fat body trembled, but he still stretched out his wrist. The feeling just now reminded him of Su Li and made him understand that the little jailer in front of him would not hurt him. This time, Su Li took away her hand after feeling the pulse and said, "It's okay for the time being. Don't eat 3 meals a day at home. Even if you want to drink water, you have to go outside. Isn't Ling Li your good brother? Why don't you ask him for help? You'd better live in the Ling house." Tang Lei understood the meaning of Su Li's words and stood still with a dull face. After a long time, he came to his senses. With a deep sense of loss in his eyes, he murmured, "I don't fight for anything. Why do I still?" Chen Gong narrowed his eyes and transmitted the sound to Su Li. "Are you sure about detoxification? There are enough materials in the mansion. If Lord Chen is willing to wait, we can cure him today. But the person who poisoned him hasn't appeared yet. Even if I detoxify him, I can't guarantee that he won't be poisoned again. Then let's do it." Chen Gong transmitted his voice and waved at Tang Lei. "You, come with us." Tang Lei also found that Chen Gong was not as terrible as he had imagined. He nodded and followed them into the inner hall of the affiliated school. Seeing that they didn't stop, he wanted to say something but stopped several times. Finally, he couldn't help saying, "Lord Chen, this is Lecturer Su's place. It's not good for us to do this." It turned out that the guy didn't realize that the little jailer was Su Li after he had a big diarrhea just now. "Don't ask what you shouldn't ask." Chen Gong's voice was so cold that Tang Lei was so scared that he didn't dare to say anything. Su Li shook her head slightly. Tang Lei's brain was also affected by taking poison all year round. He became stupid. She didn't know who hated him so much that they wanted to torture him to death in this way. The 3 of them came to the study in the back hall. Chen Gong and Tang Lei were immediately shocked by the cleanliness of the back hall. "Does Lecturer Su live here?" Tang Lei was stunned. In the empty house, not only did Su Li's writing paper, but also the whole bookshelf disappeared. There was no furniture in the whole room. The floor was so clean that it could be seen as a mirror. Obviously, it had been very carefully cleaned. Chen Gong looked dignified. From this, he could see that his opponent was terrifyingly cunning and would not be easy to deal with. Su Li walked in and walked to the wall where the desk was originally placed. She tapped the stone bricks in a strange way, and the solid stone bricks gradually became loose. Su Li grasped the right time and moved quickly to the right. The ground of the whole house rumbled. Slowly, the floor in the middle of the room moved away, revealing a stone staircase leading downwards. Su Li looked calm. No matter how many times she saw the ingenuity of the mechanism of the Tianhe country, she would be amazed. Chen Gong and Tang Lei were even more surprised. Chen Gong's eyes were full of horror. He recognized the origin of the mechanism and asked, "Is this left by your master?" "No." Su Li shook her head and said, "This is a gift from my senior fellow apprentice." Her cultivation was not high enough to find the dark iron additum. The senior fellow apprentice that she had never met was obviously not only a master of medical circle, but also had a talent in the mechanism that ordinary people could not reach. One day when she read the notes left by the senior fellow apprentice, she used the words of the Ghost Valley meditation direction to unravel the secret of the tunnel. It could be seen that the senior fellow apprentice was meticulous. Senior fellow apprentice, a figure of a cold-faced young man flashed in Chen Gong's mind. His origin was much more mysterious than Su Li's. He had never revealed his real name. He only let those playboys call him Lecturer Yu. When the 3 of them walked down the stone staircase, the mechanism above their heads was gradually closed. The walls on both sides immediately lit up automatically, illuminating the stone room. This stone room was much larger than the study on the ground. It almost covered the entire underground space of the affiliated school. It was hard for Su Li to imagine how the senior fellow apprentice solved the underground stone soil, which was not much softer than the dark iron. Bypassing several stone pillars, Chen Gong and Tang Lei followed Su Li to a place with a layout similar to that of the pharmacy. The walls were full of medicine cabinets, and there was an old ladder next to it. It seemed that it had not been used for a long time. There were messy bottles and jars on the huge medicine table. The smell of medicine mixed together and became very strange, but it made Tang Lei feel very comfortable. It seemed that his weakness also disappeared a little. "Lord Chen," Su Li called him. Chen Gong immediately took out a porcelain bottle, which contained the poisonous stomach lump from Ma Ling's body. After Su Li took it, she threw it into a transparent container, sealed it and threw it aside. Then she turned around and put the medicinal materials in the bamboo basket on the medicine cabinet one by one. She said, "Lord Chen, I need 4 hours to refine the antidote. Why don't you stroll around? Senior fellow apprentice left me a lot of strange books. They are in the bookshelf on the left. It is very interesting to read." After saying that, Su Li turned the switch and entered the deeper alchemy room. Seeing the colorless container filled with Ma Ling's stomach lump became colorful and colorful, Chen Gong twitched his mouth. He walked to the bookshelf and took down a book. Then he really read it quietly. Only Tang Lei was dumbfounded and didn't know what to do. What antidote? Looking at the smile of Lord Chen Gong, he had an illusion that he was in a dream. In the spacious alchemy room, the stone door made a dull sound and was closed slowly. The light was not dim. It could be seen that the shelves on the wall were full of bottles and jars. There were also many yellow files. It was obvious that they were more precious than those outside. The smile on Su Li's face disappeared, and she became indifferent when she was alone. She ignited the high-quality charcoal and waited for the temperature to gradually rise. Then she was lost in deep thought. It was not difficult to guess the planner behind this matter. Without the Baiwei building and Su Li in Yunjing City, the one who benefited the most was not the playboys, but Wu Xiuxiu of the Wu family. After such a long time, the owner behind the Baiwei building was not a secret in the upper circle. How could she not know who it was? But it was one thing to think of it, and another thing to find evidence to prove it. Chen Gong must show convincing evidence to clear the suspicion of the Baiwei building and make it a victim from the perpetrator. The Wu family was always ruthless. Su Li could imagine that they had destroyed all the things removed from the ground of the affiliated school, and most of the things that disappeared from Ma Ling's body had been destroyed. Thinking of this, Su Li frowned tightly. There was no way now. It seemed that she had to make plans after she tested the poison. Time ticked by. Perhaps Tang Lei felt bored, so he moved close to Chen Gong and began to read. The content of the ancient book was so marvelous that Tang Lei was shocked. His inexperienced look made Chen Gong laugh in a low voice again and again. Gradually, Tang Lei's fear of Chen Gong weakened. They talked about what happened recently, and Tang Lei knew that something big happened in the Baiwei building. "Lord, what did you say? Ma Ling and others are all dead." Tang Lei was shocked. He lowered his head and murmured, "Someone dares to kill Ma Ling? It shouldn't be. I met him that day. He was happy and said." "What did he say?" Chen Gong put away the ancient book, and his eyes were clear. He didn't expect that Tang Lei had contact with Ma Ling that day. "Ma Ling and others usually like to bully me and show off everything to me." Tang Lei shrank his neck and said in a panic, "Although I hate them, I never want to kill them." "Lord Chen, I didn't kill them." Chen Gong was so angry that he laughed. "I know it's not you." "What did they say that day?" "If Tang Lei could kill people, the sun would rise from the west." Tang Lei breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that Chen Gong would misunderstand and directly take him to the Ministry of Penalty. He stared at Chen Gong and recalled carefully. Suddenly, his eyes brightened and he said happily, "I remember. Ma Ling said that he would soon become a formal student of the National Academy and then get rid of the identity of the affiliated school. He also asked me if I wanted to go with them." "What?" Chen Gong immediately felt strange. With Ma Ling's talent and learning, it was impossible for him to enter the National Academy. Even if his father dared to bribe the National Academy blatantly, it was impossible. Under the feet of the emperor, The National Academy was the most unbearable. How could Ma Wei-Ming dare to be unlucky? So, who promised him that Ma Ling would go to the National Academy? Ma Ling was not a fool. The person who gave him the guarantee must have a high status. He deceived Ma Ling with a good reason and let Ma Ling do something. Thinking of this, Chen Gong suddenly felt numb and terrified. If Ma Ling really poisoned him, how could he investigate it? How did Ma Ling poison him? Seeing Chen Gong suddenly showing such a terrible expression, Tang Lei couldn't help but step back in fear. Suddenly, there was a sound of the stone door behind him. He was so scared that he fell to the ground. Then he looked back and saw Su Li coming out of the alchemy room. A fragrance of elixirs filled the air. Su Li glanced at Chen Gong, who was lost in thought and didn't disturb him. She walked to Tang Lei and handed a bottle of elixirs. She whispered, "Take 1 elixir every 3 days. You can recover after 21 days. But your appearance will not change, in case of alerting the enemy. Go to the Ling house and live there. Tell your good brother exactly what I said. Only in this way can you save your life. Do you understand?" Tang Lei nodded quickly and put away the elixirs confusedly. He didn't understand, so he could only remember that sentence and tell it to Brother Ling later. But one thing was clear. The little jailer was not a bad person. Her expression when she told him carefully was exactly the same as his dead mother's concern when she died. Chapter 163. Tang Lei said what he just said to Su Li again. Then Tang Lei felt cold all over. The little jailer in front of him seemed to exude a more terrible momentum than Chen Gong. But the momentum disappeared in an instant, as if it was an illusion. Back to the desk, Su Li picked up the glass bottle and looked at the black transparent liquid. She squinted her eyes and said gently, "Tang Lei, you can go. Remember what I said." Tang Lei quickly stuffed the elixir bottle into his chest and thanked Su Li honestly. Then he walked to the ground and looked back 3 times. When he walked to the stone door, Tang Lei found that he didn't know how to open the door. Suddenly, the stone door moved automatically, revealing a dazzling light. He was so scared that he almost jumped up. After he calmed down, Tang Lei walked along the stone stairs to the empty room and immediately ran to the Ling mansion. When Chen Gong came back to his senses, it was already an hour after Tang Lei left. Chen Gong was fascinated to see Su Li standing in front of the table, which was not much shorter than her. She poured jars of things into the small black glass bottles attentively. How many years had this girl lived? It was rare that she could quickly calm down in such a disaster and was not affected at all. "Cheng Jun, if you could also leave me a memory, how good it would be." The old-fashioned and serious man's eyes were filled with sadness. The sadness in his heart had never been interrupted in the past 13 years. After a while, his mind calmed down. His lips were tight and pale, and tenderness flashed in his eyes. "Soon, give me a little more time to find the murderer and avenge you. Then I will come down to accompany you, Brother Li." "Brother Li." The fat man ran on the stone road of the Ling mansion and rushed to Ling Li's knees. Ling Mo, who stood behind him with his hands down, twitched his mouth. It was a familiar scene. Ling Li lazily picked his ears, but there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. He asked, "Fat man, what's wrong with your face? Are you dying of looking for too many women recently?" "Oh, Brother Li, don't mention it. That little jailer said that he could only save his life by looking for you," Tang Lei said, and then told Ling Li everything he saw today. Ling Li was the closest person to him except his mother. He never kept anything from Ling Li. "Did Gong Chen and the little jailer go to the affiliated school? That little jailer even gave you pills and told you to come find me?" Ling Li's eyes flashed. It was obvious that the little jailer was Su Li. And it seemed that Chen Gong treated Su Li well. Chen Gong took her with him all the time. She was very safe. Ling Li curled his lips slightly, squinted his eyes and said, "What did she ask you to tell me?" Tang Lei immediately said it word for word. Ling Li and Ling Mo were slightly shocked. It was clear that someone tried to kill Tang Lei. He had been with Tang Lei all the time, but he didn't find it. "Brother Li, can you let me stay here? I was really scared some time ago." I hid in the affiliated school for 3 days and didn't dare to go home. I didn't see Su Li. I really thought that I was going to die in the affiliated school. Wow. Thinking of these days' grievances and the fright he suffered in the affiliated school today, Tang Lei finally burst into tears. His nose was running, and the last bit of seriousness in Ling Li's heart disappeared. Since the fatty could recover in more than 20 days, Ling Li didn't need to worry. But it was Su Li's turn to save Ling Li's brother. What was this? He could almost imagine how Su Li would mock him when they met next time. Thinking of this, Ling Li was so angry. Fatty Tang was not so fat and stupid when he was a child. Why didn't he notice it? Brother Li, say something if it's a deal or not, Tang Lei wailed. Ling Li came to his sense and immediately showed an impatient look. He waved his hand and said, I asked you to come to live here. Why didn't you come? How could your cruel parents treat you as a human? There are many guest rooms in my yard. You can choose one at will. But there are no maids in my yard. Don't think it's troublesome. Tang Lei was immediately overjoyed. He held Ling Li's hands with his 2 pig trotters and said gratefully, You are really a good brother. I knew Brother Li is the best. I don't need maids. There are no maids at home. I am used to it. Ling Li pretended to be disgusted and let go of his hands. But he sighed in his heart that Tang Lei lived a miserable life as the first young master of Prime Minister Tang's mansion. After Tang Lei left happily, Ling Li looked cold. He said, All kinds of monsters dare to jump around in Yunjing. Do you really think that I don't exist? Send someone to check whether the poison in Tang Lei's body is related to the martial arts circle. Also, how is the background of the Chen Gong investigated? Ling Mo handed over the file and whispered, A spy of the Ministry of Penalty was lost. They can't start again recently. Ling Li squinted his long and narrow eyes and said, Bury him well and send someone to take care of his family. Then he opened the file and said, Bury him well. It's all arranged. Ling Mo responded in a calm tone, and then he retreated to silence. The file was very long with tens of thousands of words. But Ling Li read it in less than half an hour with his eyesight. He threw it to Ling Mo and said, You also read it and tell me your opinion. Ling Mo took it and read it carefully. His eyes suddenly changed. This, Chen Gong's origin was very clear. He was a native of Yunjing. His family had lived in Yunjing for generations. He had no distant relatives. Just this point alone could dissociate him from the relationship with Su Li. The next one shocked Ling Mo greatly. Chen Gong got married at the age of 19. His wife, Wang Chengjun, was from Yunjing. The investigation of the Tianya house clearly showed that Chen Gong had never married in his life. There was such a big discrepancy in the file recorded by the Ministry of Penalty. The couple had been married for 3 years, but they didn't have a child. Ling Mo could imagine that Chen Gong was prominent in the Ministry of Penalty at that time. He was busy all day. Maybe his wife felt neglected and divorced. Ling Mo continued to read. On August 15, 235 years ago, his wife, Wang Chengjun, died. Chen Gong's temperament changed greatly. In the following 13 years, he worked hard in the case of the Ministry of Penalty and became a pillar of the Dahan country. The Mid-Autumn Festival Lantern Night 13 years ago, Ling Mo's hands trembled slightly and he was shocked. Was there such a coincidence in the world? Ling Qinglan, no. The whole Yi family of Yi Mo was also exterminated that night. The murders on the same day might be related. If the 2 cases could be investigated together, the real murderer might be found immediately. But why did the imperial court choose to conceal the case of Chen Gong and let the massacre of the Yi family become an unsolved case? For a moment, Ling Mo felt creepy as if he had touched the dark facts that couldn't be stated. Ling Li smiled lightly. If we could get it earlier, Qinglan wouldn't have been wandering around like a headless fly in the past few years. But, it's not too late now. Xian, what day is it today? Ling Mo coughed and said, Ling Xian went out to do something. Didn't you order her to do so? Today is the 6th day of the Chinese New Year. Ling Li suddenly understood. He clapped his hands and stood up. I forgot about it. Ling Mo, since she is not here, you stay and drink with me today. I haven't cooked for a long time. You have to accompany me. Yes, master. Ling Mo answered with a bitter face. He used to think that the master was the most perfect person in the world. He reached the inborn realm at a young age and was a young hierarch. His mental state was beyond the inborn realm and his fighting power was unparalleled. He was good at all kinds of arts and crafts, and was also good at zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. He knew a little about the medical circle and the poison circle, until he ate the dishes made by the master. After a while, black smoke came out of the kitchen. Ling Li tasted the dishes he made and sighed deeply. Since God had allowed him to transmigrate to this world, why didn't he get rid of his bad habit of cooking? Alas, he hadn't eaten the authentic hometown dishes for a long time. Ling Mo was still trying to deal with the scorched dark dishes and cried silently. Alas, at this time, he really wanted to eat the dishes made by Miss Su Li. At this moment, the two men unexpectedly missed the simple dishes on the table in the valley of the Desu town. While eating, Ling Li suddenly said, Ling Mo, after the 15th day of the Chinese New Year, the autumn hunting will start soon, right? Yes, master. Ling Mo answered, and his face became serious. Ling Li leaned back on the rattan chair and closed his eyes. He rubbed his eyebrows. If he could straighten his clothes and straighten his hair, he would be a beautiful picture. Dongfang Hu, the old guy, comes out from the imperial palace. Even if there are seniors with him, the bad guys hiding in Yunjing will come out to test him. Send someone to keep an eye on him. It is a good opportunity. If we can take the opportunity to eliminate some strong opponents, it will be better. Speaking of this, Ling Li suddenly opened his eyes and said, I must get the full moon. In the underground adytum of the affiliated school, Su Li breathed a long sigh of relief and began to clean all the bottles and cans. Chen Gong noticed the movement and knew that the poison test had finished. What's the result? He came over and asked. Su Li's eyes flashed and she replied, the poisons in Master Ma Ling's body are extremely complicated. There are 3 kinds of poisons. The toxicity of the 3 poisons is not very strong. But when they are mixed together, it becomes a deadly poison. 3 kinds. Chen Gong was shocked. How could Ma Ling be poisoned by so many poisons? He was poisoned by 3 kinds of poisons in a day. The only explanation was that the murderer's attainments in the circle of poison were equally powerful and the control of poisons was excellent. He could understand the first 2 kinds of poisons. After all, the beggar's chicken of the Baiwei building was poisoned. Later, Ma Ling poisoned the Baiwei building. But where did the last one come from? If it was really the 3rd kind of poison that Ma Ling ate according to the murderer behind the scenes, then, how could he investigate it? For a moment, Chen Gong didn't know where to start. Su Li stood aside and said nothing. She had an important discovery that she didn't mention to Chen Gong. The mixture of 3 poisons was fatal. Chapter 164. Chen Gong and Su Li left the affiliated school of the National Academy with a sad face. At this moment, it was late. There were few pedestrians on the dim street. Chen Gong and Su Li walked to the Ministry of Penalty one after the other. Suddenly, behind Su Li, there was a 3rd person's feet. This person's footsteps landed on the ground silently. He appeared abruptly like a ghost. Chen Gong, who walked in the front, was still immersed in thought and didn't notice that there was one more person in the team. The passers-by thought that the 3 people knew each other and didn't notice anything wrong. Su Li's eyes under the brim of the hat flashed. Her well-behaved look revealed a bit of joy and blame. She was happy that Fang Yuan, who came behind her, finally broke through to the inborn realm and became a young master. She blamed that Fang Yuan was so bold that he came to her blatantly. He didn't know how many eyes were staring at him now. However, now she was with Chen Gong and her identity had not been exposed for the time being. Fang Yuan's action seemed to take a lot of risks, but in fact, it was very safe. Why didn't you inform us that something happened to you? Fang Yuan transmitted the sound in silence with a trace of anger. If he didn't happen to hear about the Baiwei building when he went to invite the craftsman, he and Chu Qingning would still be in the dark. It happened suddenly. Do you think that I have a way to hide the news from the Ministry of Penalty and send it to you? Su Li raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, however, "It's good that you can find me. I want you to do one thing." "You?" Fang Yuan glared at her. Did she know how dangerous she was? If he didn't see her standing in front of him, he would really go crazy. However, when he met such a strong woman, he didn't dare to show his mind for fear of unpredictable consequences. He could only transmit the sound in silence helplessly. "What's the matter?" Su Li transmitted the sound in silence seriously and became cold. "Go to find Chu Lu of the Hongyang house," and so on. Fang Yuan's expression changed slightly. It turned out that when they built the Linli building, Su Li didn't stay idle. She used some unknown method to get a complete intelligence line, which was extremely helpful for the development of the Linli building in the future. But according to Su Li's tone, it seemed that this line was not so solid. After listening to Su Li's explanation, Fang Yuan nodded slightly and disappeared behind Su Li in the blink of an eye, as if he had never appeared. Even though he had just stabilized his realm at Xiantian Realm Level 1, he was no longer an existence that an acquired realm martial artist could surpass. No one knew whether it was intentional or not, but the way Chen Gong chose to go back to the Ministry of Penalty happened to pass the gate of the Su house. Chen Gong deliberately slowed down and whispered, "Shall we go in and take a look?" Su Li shook her head without saying anything and motioned them to keep walking. She just scanned the Su house with her psychic awareness, but there was no breath of her eldest brother. There were only Su Zipei and her daughter in the house. Even Li Yuelian and Su Qinghao were gone. Why did she go in? But where could Li Yuelian go if she wasn't at home? At this time, Qinghao's class should be over. Chen Gong didn't insist or ask more. He took Su Li away. Before long, in the dusk, Su Li saw a slim woman walking towards her. Her face was completely covered by the cyan robe, which made it hard for people to see her clearly. Her pneuma was even more obscure. The two passed by each other without looking at each other. After a few steps, Su Li suddenly felt something was wrong. She stopped and looked back, but saw that the latter had turned the corner and disappeared. "What's wrong?" Chen Gong looked back and asked. Su Li shook her head calmly, "Nothing. I just mistook her for someone else." But she was not calm at all in her heart. That person had his pneuma, but it was definitely a woman. She couldn't be wrong. Su Li's eyes were as bright as the starry sky, and then as deep as an ancient well in an instant. The woman beside him, even in the previous life, he never mentioned her, or never mentioned her in front of her. As for the green-robed woman, she turned the corner and saw the Su residence on the street. The lips that were revealed under the green robe curled up. In the next moment, she had already snuck into the Su residence like a wisp of smoke. The guards were useless to her. Su Zipei was carefully feeding medicine to Zhu Yang in the room. After a period of recuperation, Zhu Yang's injury was not a big problem. Although she couldn't get out of bed and walk, she was much better than the previous state where she often wailed. No one knew how hot the fire of anger in Zhu Yang's heart was. Su Li, the bastard she picked up, now climbed over her head and became a powerful woman in Yunjing. Although her daughter took the jade pendant of Su Li's birth history, she was still unknown. All kinds of fantasies were broken. Coupled with all kinds of humiliation, she couldn't wait to eat Su Li's flesh and drink Su Li's blood. If she didn't hear from Zipei that Su Li was involved in the Ministry of Penalty and was secretly locked up, she was afraid that she would die of anger before she could get out of bed. Zhu Yang opened her mouth and was about to take a sip of medicine. Suddenly, her eyes widened. Su Zipei noticed that something was wrong and looked back subconsciously. She saw a cyan-robed woman standing less than 1 meter behind her. She was so scared that she fell from the chair. The hot medicine spilled on the quilt and some on Zhu Yang's face. "Ah, it's so hot." Zhu Yang hurriedly wiped her face and finally calmed down the pain. Then she had time to look at the cyan-robed woman who suddenly came in. Judging from the figure, it was a woman. "This is the mansion of the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. Who are you? How dare you break in?" Zhu Yang's face was red because of the hot medicine. She tried to look dignified. However, she looked quite funny because of her paralyzed body. It was really embarrassing. Su Zipei was even worse. She crouched on the edge of the bed. It seemed that she could drive away the fear in her heart as long as she could be closer to her mother. "Ha ha. A charming chuckle came from the cyan-robed woman. A sweet and magnetic voice sounded, "Miss Sue, Mrs. Ju. Don't panic. I don't come with malice. Instead, we can make a deal." Zhu Yang was shocked. Several thoughts flashed in her mind in a moment. Then she stared at the cyan-robed woman and said, "Judging from your voice, you don't sound too old, so I'll call you Miss. Judging from your dress, I know that you are a noble lady in Yunjing. Zipei and I are just from the countryside. I really don't know how to make a deal with you." The cyan-robed woman smiled gently and said in a low and hoarse voice, "You hate Su Li and want her to die. I also have the same idea. So, it is enough." Zhu Yang's eyes suddenly brightened. It seemed that there was a better way for her in front of her. This was a benefit that fell from the sky. She had nothing. No matter what the cyan-robed woman wanted, as long as she could kill Su Li, everything was worth it. In the gloomy sky, it finally began to rain, and it seemed to be gradually intensifying. In the Hongyang house, Chu Lu leaned against the window and was lost in thought. Her body was graceful and curvy. She was really enchanting. Listening to the increasingly heavy rain outside, she couldn't help but feel upset. She didn't even know that the rain outside wet her sleeves. Since the mysterious person who claimed to be Mr. Li gave an order last time, he seemed to disappear. He didn't check the results of her intelligence collection and didn't intend to continue to give orders. Wasn't she the informer of that person? Why didn't he contact her for a long time? An abandoned informer was of no value. Would that person give her the antidote of Hongchen powder? Squeak! The door behind her was gently opened. Chu Lu didn't look back and said in a reproachful tone, "I said to wait outside. Chio, when will you?" As she said, she turned back. The unhappiness on her face immediately turned into deep shock. It was not her personal maid, Chio, who came in, but a tall and thin young man with a mask. If she couldn't see his face, she couldn't tell how old he was. But the only thing she was sure was that he was absolutely no more than 30 years old. In front of the beauty, Fang Yuan was calm. He held the sword in his right hand and waved his left hand to close the door automatically. Chio, who was waiting outside the door, didn't notice it at all. She didn't even hear the sound of the door opening. Chu Lu's pupils shrank. Another inborn senior. Although the way of his appearance was different from Su Li's, Chu Lu couldn't help but think of Su Li because they were both young inborn seniors. "Mr. Li?" Chu Lu asked tentatively. Fang Yuan said coldly, "Miss Chu, you are really smart. But the Lord has been busy recently and has no time to come in person. Please forgive me." His voice seemed to be polite, but from his tone, Chu Lu knew that the young man didn't mean to be polite at all. His cold eyes looked at her through the mask as if he was looking at a dead person. Chu Lu was scared. A cold-blooded and ruthless young man of the inborn realm who killed people like flax gradually formed in her heart. How much power did Mr. Li have in his hands? For a moment, the image of Su Li in Chu Lu's heart was more treacherous and terrible. No, why did Mr. Li send such a person here? Chu Lu quickly thought of the crux and couldn't help trembling. Looking at Chu Lu's changing expression, Fang Yuan remained silent all the time. His momentum became more and more oppressive, which made Chu Lu feel suffocated. She gritted her teeth and said, "Did I do something recently that dissatisfied the Lord? If so, please tell me clearly. Even if I die, I want to die with a clear explanation." Fang Yuan sneered and said, "Miss Chu, you are smart. Don't you know the reason why the Lord is angry? You underestimate the Lord's spies too much. Do you think that the Lord will be blind without you?" Chu Lu struggled in her heart. How could it be possible? At the banquet on the Tianhe River, the first prince and her people were arranged. It was impossible to leak the information. After thinking for a while, Chu Lu summoned up the courage to look at Fang Yuan. She said unwillingly, "I don't understand. Please tell me clearly." Swish. Chapter 165. Ah. Chu Lu closed her eyes in horror. She shouldn't be so weak because of her cultivation. However, Fang Yuan's cold-bloodedness and strength shocked her severely. The wind of the sword almost touched Chu Lu's face. Although it didn't touch her face, Chu Lu's face was burning with pain. But at this moment, Chu Lu didn't care about the pain on her face. She shrank in the corner like a helpless and weak woman. She covered her heaving chest and just calmed down. He didn't kill me. Just now, she really thought that Mr. Li wanted to kill her. After such a shock, the last hope in her eyes disappeared. Do you want me to tell you more? Fang Yuan's voice was still cold. Chu Lu trembled slightly and said, I dare not do it again. I did hide something. But I don't mean to hurt you. I just have doubts in my heart. At this moment, she couldn't wait to tell everything she knew in exchange for a chance to survive. What doubts? Fang Yuan sneered and said, do you want to keep the secret from the He sect or stay in the sect? Or do you want to know why the Lord hasn't contacted you for so long? Or, do you want to cooperate with the first prince in exchange for glory, splendor, and wealth? Chu Lu trembled and knelt down. She said, I dare not. Why don't you dare? I have seen you do it all the time. Fang Yuan said seriously. His acting skills seemed to be improved under the influence of Chu Qingning. He said, do you think that the Lord asked you to be an informer and you can directly become one of us without any examination? Chu Lu was shocked. She finally knew what the crux of the matter was. It turned out that what she did these days was observed by Mr. Li. No wonder he had never contacted her. What did I do these days? Chu Lu tried to recall what she did during this time. She had been keeping an eye on what Su Li told her. During this period, she also contacted the He sect, but she didn't expose Mr. Li. Only the first prince, thinking of the stupid performance of the first prince that night and the sudden appearance of the young inborn expert who worked for Mr. Li, Chu Lu's heart had been tilted. At this moment, she was forced to this point, but she suddenly calmed down. She raised her head and said, I only came into contact with the first prince half a year ago. On the surface, the first prince is cooperating with the Joyful Union sect, but in reality, I have a deeper cooperation with the first prince. For example, if necessary, I will reveal the whereabouts of the He Huan sect to him. Fang Yuan could sense that Chu Lu's voice trembled slightly. If she told the secret, it meant that she had no way out and could only rely on Su Li. Otherwise, Su Li just needed to release the news secretly, and Chu Lu would die miserably immediately. Chu Lu took the initiative to give them the evidence. Su Li completed half of the task. Fang Yuan was slightly relaxed, and even his tone eased. Get up, Miss Chu. You are very smart and sensible. The Lord will treat you well in the future. As long as you don't betray the Lord, your life will not be in danger. Chu Lu nodded and glanced at Fang Yuan's calm eyes. Then she looked away as if she got an electric shock. Finally, she stood up slowly. Under Fang Yuan's command, she took the file about the first prince and handed it to Fang Yuan. After putting away the file, Chu Lu consciously said what Su Li had told her before. Su Zipei's itinerary is very simple. She goes out to buy medicine almost every 7 days. However, a spy recently came to report that she contacted with a man in a bamboo hat 2 days ago in the morning. But, speaking of this, Chu Lu slightly frowned, there are seniors around that man. My people dare not get too close, so I don't know what they talked about. Fang Yuan said softly, I will truthfully report it to the Lord. After the first thing is done, we should talk about the second thing. What else? Chu Lu's beautiful eyes widened. She was scared enough just now. She didn't want to be hit by the sword again. It's just a common question. Fang Yuan's tone was a little careless, but what he said made Chu Lu, who had just recovered, completely pale. What's the matter with the fatal powder on Ma Ling? Can Miss Chu Lu explain it to the Lord? How could it be possible? Even in the He sect in Yunjing, only 3 or 4 people knew it. Except for her, the people who knew it were all loyal to the He sect. It was impossible for them to expose it. Don't guess. The Lord is proficient in the medical circle and the poison circle. She can detoxify your Hongchen powder. How can she not detect the fatal powder? Fang Yuan's expression was full of contempt and disdain, as if the secret prescription of the He sect was simply rubbish. Chu Lu gasped. The He sect was the most powerful poison circle in the entire Linhai continent. The fatal powder was a unique poison that made people tremble with fear. If the fatal powder was rubbish, The poisons in the entire Linhai continent were even worse than rubbish. Miss Chu Lu, it seems that you don't want to say it. Fang Yuan raised his eyebrows and said coldly. Chu Lu immediately came to herself. After a moment of silence, she began to explain. Nothing could be done more than 3 times. But she was very clear that in front of Mr. Li, there was no chance for her to make mistakes. This time, she not only couldn't hide it, but also had to explain it clearly and beautifully. Ma Ling's death was not caused by the He sect, but by young Master Wu Jin of the Wu family. Young Master Wu Jin secretly supported the first prince, while Ma Ling was a member of the Ma family. Although it is not clear which prince the Ma family secretly supported, it is definitely not the first prince. As she spoke, Chu Lu forgot to be nervous and said her own opinion. The Baiwei building is the property of Su Qingtan. Su Qingtan was marked as the third prince because of Ling Qinglan, so Master Wu Jin made a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He wanted to draw out the action of the person behind the Ma family. As for Su Li, it was just to please her sister. So, he solved it conveniently. Fang Yuan frowned. It turned out that the situation was far more complicated than he thought. Su Li didn't say anything to them. Did she always bear it by herself? At the same time, Fang Yuan felt inexplicably distressed. He hated that their identities were sensitive and they didn't have powerful strength. So, they couldn't help at all. Su Li also saw it. If it hadn't happened suddenly, he might not even have the chance to run errands. Continue to observe Su Zipei. Don't relax. At the same time, secretly disclose the clues to Chen Gong of the Ministry of Penalty. Don't be found by your people. After giving the instructions arranged by Su Li in advance, Fang Yuan jumped out of the window without hesitation and disappeared from Chu Lu's sight. Phew. Chu Lu's tense body finally collapsed completely. She gasped for a few times and found that her back had been soaked with cold sweat. No matter the first prince, the He sect or the mysterious Mr. Li, they were all fierce tigers for her. But, for the slim chance of survival, she had to make a deal with them. Mo, where are you? Sister, I can't hold on any longer. The person who spoke was the only one who was listening to the bitter murmur. The night was as cold as water. Su Li sat alone at the table in the room and stared at the night sky in a daze. She was waiting for the sentries of the Ministry of Penalty to relax their vigilance. This was Chen Gong's room. The layout of the room was just like him. It was cold and solemn everywhere. Men and women were different. The Ministry of Penalty was very safe. In order not to make Su Li misunderstand, Chen Gong prepared to go back to his home these days. It was convenient for Su Li to act. Su Li didn't go out of the Ministry of Penalty until it was from 1 to 3 o'clock in the morning. She got the files that Fang Yuan had sorted out. After returning to the room and reading, Su Li didn't say anything for a long time. She didn't sweep away the ashes of the burned files on the ground until the dawn illuminated the room. Then she got up and continued to investigate the case with Chen Gong. Chen Gong wore a neat official uniform, which was a little different from his usual slovenly appearance. It was obvious that he just came out from the morning court. His face showed no joy or anger, but Su Li still sensed that he was in a bad mood. The emperor ordered me to solve the case before August 15th. Chen Gong stretched out his hand and hammered the table, making a heavy sound, just like his mood. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. Today was the 7th day of August. It was only 8 days before August 15th. Why was the emperor in a hurry? At this moment, she vaguely realized that the invitation of the eunuch might be much more dangerous than she thought. Oh, Lord Chen is really idle. Why don't you investigate the case in the morning? Instead, you are staring at the table in a daze. Suddenly, a lazy voice came from outside the yard. Su Li looked up and saw the appearance of the person. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows slightly. The person was a handsome young man. He wore a golden robe with a large embroidered cloud pattern on it. His hair was combed in a neat bun. Just by looking at the way he walked and the 2 nostrils that were almost facing the sky, it could be known that he was not a talented man, but an extremely arrogant playboy. Shouldn't such a playboy stay away from the Ministry of Penalty? Why was this young man not afraid of Chen Gong, but ridiculed him? Chen Gong stood up and shielded Su Li behind him. His eyes were very cold. Child Ma, the Ministry of Penalty is not the Ma family. It is not a place where you can behave atrociously. Even if you are the son of Prime Minister Ma, you have no privilege here. Get out. Hearing that, the young man surnamed Ma immediately laughed and winked. Lord Chen, please calm down. Don't be angry, Lord Chen. I'm here to see how your investigation is going. After all, Ma Ling is my follower. I'll lose face if he dies without knowing the reason. And today, the Emperor said that you have to solve the case in 8 days. Now there are some clues. Can you tell me a little? Chen Gong remained calm and pointed at the door. Get out. If you don't leave, I will have to ask you to leave. The smile on the face of the young man surnamed Ma finally disappeared slowly. He spat at his feet and said in a gloomy voice, I don't want to stay in this broken place. Since Lord Chen is so confident, then this young master would like to see what you have to report 8 days later. Chen Gong raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, Guards. Finally, a trace of panic appeared on the face of the young man surnamed Ma. He turned back and ran to the door. At the same time, he didn't forget to say some harsh words. Chen Gong, you don't have many days to show off. Wait and see. Chapter 166. When the young man left, Chen Gong relaxed. At the moment when he looked back, the light in Su Li's eyes immediately became curious, which made Chen Gong frown slightly. He couldn't help but exhort, this guy is not a good person. If you meet him in the future, you'd better not be in his eyes. Who is that child? Su Li had a guess in her heart, but she pretended to be confused and asked. Ma Jintian. Chen Gong looked very serious and said, Su Li, although you are protected by the identity of the lecturer of the affiliated school, you can't provoke 2 playboys in Yunjing. The first one is Ling Li of the Ling family, and the second one is Ma Jintian. Chen Gong seemed to think that it was not convincing, so he sat down and said in detail, Ling Li, Tang Lei and Ma Jintian are called the 3 playboys in Yunjing and also the 3 wastes in Yunjing. Ling Li's legs are disabled, and Tang Lei is weak and incompetent. They are really useless, but Ma Jintian pretends to be useless. He may not be as lawless as Ling Li, but his means are more sinister than Ling Li's. He is quite fond of beauties. If you fall into his hands, even I can't save you. Do you know? Su Li's face turned pale. It seemed that she was scared, but she smiled sweetly in an instant and said, Thank you for your concern. You are the second person who treats me sincerely except my eldest brother. Looking at the girl's pure and flawless smile, Chen Gong was stunned. He turned his back uncomfortably and stood up. He pretended to be cold and said, I am going to a place today. It is not suitable for you to follow me. Stay here and don't walk around. Then, he took his casual clothes and went through the door without waiting for Su Li's answer. He looked a little embarrassed. Su Li was a little surprised. Chen Gong asked her to investigate the case with him. Why did he change his mind after Ma Jintian appeared? But it's good. It gives me a chance to act alone. Su Li pressed the brim of the hat to cover her face. With the cover of the identity of a pawn of the Ministry of Penalty, she left the busy Ministry of Penalty in a few steps. Passing by a clothes shop, she picked up some clothes and came out. She had turned into a thin man with a scar on his face. If Su Huanli was here, he would definitely recognize this face. It was clearly the face of the man who extorted hundreds of thousands of taels of silver from him in the Desu town. Su Li broke a bottle of wine and sprinkled it on her clothes. Then she staggered and bumped into Ma Jintian, who was walking towards her. Bang! Ma Jintian's face was gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, a strong smell of alcohol came to his nose. He suddenly came to himself, but he didn't have time to react. He was hit by Su Li and fell to the ground. Su Li, who was swaying, immediately turned into a shadow and quickly disappeared at the corner of the street. Ma was stunned. Ma Jintian was. He was stunned and then he laughed. Ma, Gong. Ma was. And Ma, said. Gong, Ma, he. Ma T. Li, who was, Gong was. And Gong. Ma. Li, It was rumored that he didn't practice Shengong. But now, his cultivation reached the acquired 8th hurdle. The middle-aged man in black, who was called Ma, ran into the dark alley. He looked indifferent. He was only responsible for the safety of his master. The drunken thief was just an ordinary person. It was impossible for him to hurt his master. But he stole his master's money bag. In the end, he still chose to obey his young master's order. He stamped his feet and flew up like an eagle. He saw the alley that Su Li ran into. He quickly followed her and stretched out his right hand to grab the drunken man's back. But at this time, a black shadow rushed to his face at an extremely fast speed. The sonic boom caused by the force made his calm face change suddenly. He forcibly twisted his body in the air to avoid the black shadow. He fell to the ground and retreated several feet to keep a distance from the drunken man. His heart was still beating fast. He was not an ordinary person. He was a senior. The middle-aged man in black retreated with vigilance. He looked down at the hidden weapon under his feet. It was the stolen money bag of his master. But the cloth on the surface of the bag had been torn, revealing the gold and silver inside. "Uncle, what's wrong? Catch him quickly." Ma Jintian didn't see the previous scene. He walked in and saw the confrontation between the two people. He couldn't help but say discontentedly. The middle-aged man in black slightly changed his expression. He immediately pulled Ma Jintian, who wanted to go forward, and protected him behind him. At this time, Ma Jintian noticed the abnormality. He immediately put away his playboy expression and looked at the drunken man standing on the other side of the road. He said politely, "Your Excellency, you have excellent martial arts skills. You should be a person in the martial arts circle, right? May I ask why you lured me here?" Su Li laughed hoarsely. The middle-aged man in black was terrified and his scalp was numb. The genuine energy in the voice. This person must be a senior who had reached the inborn 6th hurdle. He was just in the inborn 2nd hurdle. If he fought, "Master, run away as soon as you see something wrong. I can't fight with him for one round." Ma Jintian was shocked. He couldn't help but curse that he didn't check the almanac when he went out today. How could he provoke such a senior to attack him? "Master Ma, don't panic. If I wanted to kill you, you would have been killed on the street." Su Li's voice made Ma Jintian's heart tremble. He sweated on his forehead. But he also felt relieved. At least now, the drunken man wouldn't kill him. Don't believe all the rumors. Master Ma, you have reached the acquired 8th hurdle at such a young age. You should be a young talent. But you are called the 3 wastes in Yunjing together with the 2 wastes. I really don't understand. Tut tut. Ma Jintian had recovered a little calmness at this moment. He smiled and said, "Senior, you flatter me. The bird that sticks out will be shot. I am just afraid of death, so I choose to do this. In terms of talent and learning, I am still far behind those talents in the National Academy." Su Li also smiled. Suddenly, she said coldly, "Master Ma, do you think that I am blind? With such a cultivation and the protection of a warrior of the inborn realm, it is not good for you to lie through your teeth." Ma Jintian's expression was slightly stiff. He just said a few modest words, but this person took it seriously. Her temperament was really weird. "Oh, I almost forget it. I am ordered by the Lord to pass a message to you. I'm sure that young Master Ma and the person behind you have been extremely troubled by the Ma family's matter recently, right?" Su Li, who pretended to be a drunken man, patted her head. It seemed that she just remembered it. Ma Jintian's heart sank when he heard it. He couldn't help but feel a little scared. This person knew him so well and knew who was behind him. He had never relaxed the monitoring of the martial arts circle who sneaked into Yunjing, but he knew nothing about the person in front of him. Besides, according to the tone, the person was from a sect in the martial arts circle like the Lianxia cult. When Ma Jintian thought of the time when he contacted with the Lianxia cult, he couldn't help but be in awe. Only a sect in the martial arts circle above the 9th grade could sneak into Yunjing without being noticed. The force behind the drunken man was absolutely not worse than that of the Lianxia cult. "Since you are well behaved, I will be merciful to tell you that Ma Ling was poisoned by the fateless powder of the Hahuan sect. After saying that, Su Li rushed into the fork and disappeared. Ma Jintian took a deep breath and immediately went back to the mansion with Uncle Ya. Yunjing was too dangerous now. He made up his mind that if there was nothing important during this time, he would never step out of the house. Damn it. There are still more than 3 months before the auction. Will I be bored at home? Ma Jintian opened the gate of the Ma mansion while swearing. He didn't forget what Su Li told him. He immediately ran to his father's study and shouted, "Dad, I got a clue." Ma Da was drinking tea in the room. Ma Jintian's sudden shout almost made him choke. Bastard. He stood up and was about to teach his son a lesson. After hearing what his son encountered in the daytime, he instantly became serious. I said it was strange. No matter how anxious the third prince was, he couldn't do it when the situation was not clear. The poison of the Hehuan sect has always been mysterious. In this case. No, I have to inform the master as soon as possible. Ma Da didn't have time to cough. He took out a piece of paper and wrote a secret letter quickly. He handed it to his confidant. This letter must be delivered to the master before tonight. Yes. Chen Gong changed into casual clothes and wandered around. He actually came to a remote street in the outer city. His name made people tremble with fear, but not many people recognized his face. At this moment, he was dressed in ordinary clothes, and walking on the street, he was an ordinary pedestrian. Well, why is there a new shop next to elder brother Xian's winery? Chen Gong stopped and saw the tall building that was still under construction next to Juyu Winery. He was slightly stunned, but he didn't care too much. He stepped into Juyu Winery. Seeing that the winery was still so cold, he couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Elder brother Xian, I am here again. Do you have any wine?" "I don't have anything else, but I have enough wine." A hearty laughter came from the back hall. Then, a poor middle-aged man dressed like a scholar came out. When he saw Chen Gong, he immediately put his arm around Chen Gong's shoulder and said, "Come on. You haven't been here for a long time. Come in and drink with me when your sister-in-law goes out to buy vegetables." Chen Gong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Elder brother Xian was still so afraid of his wife. After 3 rounds of drinking, the landlady didn't come back. The shabby scholar shouted, "Great." Then he sighed, "Alas, you don't know how hard my life is. That woman is getting more and more presumptuous recently. She even doesn't let me drink wine. She is really going against the heavens." Hearing the shabby scholar's nagging, Chen Gong was full of envy and immediately said with a smile, "She is doing it for you. The winery's business is not good. How can you drink as much as before?" Hearing that, the shabby scholar pulled a long face and said sadly, "Brother, you have changed. You didn't say that before. Now you even say the same tone as that woman. My life is really hard." As he spoke, the shabby scholar wiped his tears, and he actually had the tendency to cry. Chen Gong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He interrupted helplessly, "Elder brother, don't make trouble. Don't make a fuss. I came here today for proper business. You and my sister-in-law are very knowledgeable. Have you ever heard of a strange poison mixed with 3 poisons? Puff." Chapter 167. Chen Gong's face was covered with wine, and he looked confused. The shabby scholar put away his extremely shocked expression and coughed a few times before noticing Chen Gong's miserable situation. He quickly picked up a rag to wipe Chen Gong's face and advised in a low voice, "Brother, let me give you a piece of advice. This case isn't something you can handle. You should hand it over to the Supreme Court as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you get into trouble, even I won't be able to save you." Chen Gong's expression changed. He grabbed the shabby scholar's hand and said solemnly, "His Majesty has ordered me to solve the case in 8 days. There's no time to lose." The shabby scholar scratched his ear and winked, "Haven't we already caught a family of scapegoats? Brother, you are a cruel official of the Dahan country. Can't you make the Su family plead guilty? There is a way." Chen Gong's eyes were burning. He stared at the shabby scholar and said seriously, "But I don't want to." The shabby scholar slowly poured himself another glass of wine, and his mean voice suddenly became as gentle as a gentleman's. He chuckled and said, You asked for the secret of the martial arts world as soon as you came. If you don't tell me, I can't help you." Chen Gong was silent. He didn't know who the shabby scholar was. He only knew that the shabby scholar's surname was Xian. He ran a pub in Yunjing for many years. A few years ago, he almost needed to drink every night to drown his sorrows. However, he didn't want to be seen by others. So, he found this winery. Day after day, he got familiar with the winery couple. Later, when the Ministry of Penalty encountered a big case and faced several difficulties, he revealed his troubles to elder brother Xian. Surprisingly, elder brother Xian told him the secrets of the martial arts world, which helped him solve the case successfully. Only then did he realize that the winery he had stumbled upon was not ordinary. 6 or 7 years passed in the blink of an eye. After Chen Gong became the minister of the Ministry of Justice, he came less often. The two were still close and called each other brothers. But even so, Chen Gong still didn't fully trust the couple. This was the natural fear and vigilance of the secular people toward the unknown martial arts world. But this time, Chen Gong knew that he had to say it. He took a deep breath. He continued, 13 years ago, because of my mistake, my wife died on the street. Until now, we have not been able to find the murderer. Later, when the autopsy was conducted, it was found that my wife was pregnant for 2 months. 1 corpse, 2 lives. The wine glass in the shabby scholar's hand stopped, and the lady boss, who had just entered the room, also slowed down her footsteps, her eyes shining brightly. Chen Gong was immersed in his memories and did not notice anything. There was also a big case that day. The Yi family in Yunjing was destroyed overnight. The morgue of the Ministry of Penalty was almost full. No one cared about my wife. At that time, I brought her home out of selfishness. At this point, Chen Gong's eyes were filled with pain. This step was right, but it was also a big mistake. The next day, the Ministry of Justice caught fire and burned more than 100 corpses of the Yi family beyond recognition. There was no way to investigate the case. I brought my wife back to our house to escape, but when I returned, I found that everyone who had been in contact with her case had died in the fire, and the case files had disappeared. Apart from me, no one in the Ministry of Justice remembers that such a case happened on the same day as the Yi family's cold case. Chen Gong's hand holding the wine glass was trembling. The shabby scholar sighed slightly, picked up the wine glass and clinked with him, and said, "But you are her husband, and what you said is invalid. Even if you are now the minister of the Ministry of Justice, you dare not expose this secret. You are afraid that the culprit 13 years ago will also erase you, and you can't find out the truth." The lady boss squatted in the back hall to pick vegetables, and her expression didn't change. In the martial arts circle, Chen Gong's experience was just the same and common. If they didn't have a friendship 6 or 7 years ago, her husband might even sigh reluctantly. Chen Gong took a deep breath and clenched his fists. "I have nothing to do with the Su family, but Su Li. She is so pure and kind. She shouldn't be involved in the conspiracy. I want to save her. Maybe my wife in heaven blesses me and gives me a chance to atone for my sins. I know that the 2 brothers and sisters-in-law are all great masters. I don't ask for your help, but I hope that you can tell me the origin of the strange poison." The shabby scholar's eyes changed, and he looked at the lady boss who was picking vegetables. The lady boss shook her head slightly. He was slightly stunned, and then patted Chen Gong's shoulder. He said helplessly, "It's not that I don't want to help you. Even if you know the origin of the strange poison, you can't investigate it. Which high-grade sect in the martial arts circle is worse than the Dahan country? You must be careful if you fight against that kind of existence." The lady boss shook her head and continued to pick vegetables. What was the difference between this and saying it clearly? Chen Gong suddenly understood, and then he was full of bitterness. He didn't hold much hope when he came here, but when the shabby scholar said it, he still felt disappointed. "Thank you, elder brother. But I have to try whether I can succeed or not." Chen Gong left the winery. The lady boss stood up and pointed at the spoiled vegetables on the ground. She snorted, "Sweep it quickly. You can't even sweep your own land, but you want to manage others' land? Xian Jingju, when can you change your bad habit?" The shabby scholar put down the wine glass and smiled bitterly. He picked up the broom obediently and sighed, "I'm afraid I can't change it." The lady boss stared at him, but she didn't pull his ear as before. She said in a low voice, "I don't care about other things. Don't forget our purpose of coming to Yunjing." The shabby scholar nodded, but he sighed in his heart. Could the old bald ass's words be trusted? 7 years passed in a flash. He didn't even see his brother-in-law, let alone Xiaoyun's daughter. "When the 10-year period is over, I will go to the Zen mountain to ask for an explanation." In the Linli building next door, Chu Qingning and others looked at the poisonous insect in Fang Yuan's hands. They looked at each other and were speechless for a long time. Fang Yuan put away the poisonous insect. After breaking through the inborn hurdle, his natal poisonous insect also changed. It not only expanded the tracking range from 10,000 miles to 30,000 miles, but also could detect all the sounds within a radius of 300 feet. Today, he just tried it, and he even got the important information of the Juyu winery. It could be regarded as an inadvertent success. Although I don't know the function of the Chen Palace, I'd better tell Su Li as soon as possible. Yin Shuatong made a decision and said, the Linli building was scheduled to open on August 15th, but Su Li couldn't come because of the case. We can only wait for Su Li to come out. That's settled. Chu Qingning laughed. Looking at Yin Shuatong, who was faintly worried, he couldn't help but pat his chest and said, "Don't worry. This kind of situation is not difficult for Su Li. Before you came, the situation in the Desu town was much more serious than this, but it was easily solved by her. This time, with the help of the Chen Palace, she will definitely be fine." "Really?" Yin Shuatong breathed a sigh of relief. Although she was still worried, Chu Qingning's words made her a little more confident. But she didn't know that Chu Qingning was also very anxious. This was Yunjing, which couldn't be compared with a small place like the Desu town. "I'm going to practice." Fang Yuan heard Chu Qingning's words, and there was a helpless anger in his eyes. He turned around and left after saying that. Chu Qingning sighed and said, "Is he not satisfied after breaking through the inborn hurdle? He must be crazy in practicing recently." On the street, people were shouting incessantly. It was a noisy and prosperous scene. Chen Gong walked along the street. He used to be ruthless, but now he was at a loss. After all, he was just a cruel official who could only use torture. In the face of the powerful sects and the oppression of the two princes, he found that he might not be able to save Su Li. There were still 8 days, but he felt desperate. Bang! Turning the corner of the street, Chen Gong was careless and bumped into someone. His feet did not move, but that person fell straight down in front of Chen Gong, and fell flat on his face like a dog eating shit. "Damn it! Don't you have eyes when you walk? Be careful." Seeing that Chen Gong was not easy to be trifled with, the person behind him scolded him, and the voice gradually faded away. Chen Gong turned his head expressionlessly. When he was about to continue to walk, he suddenly felt that there was something in his arms. His expression changed slightly, and he took out the thing in his arms. It was a file. Chen Gong suddenly turned his head and looked at the bustling crowd. At this moment, he couldn't see the person who bumped into him. He was in a trance just now, so he didn't even have an impression of the person's face. What on earth? Chen Gong was surprised and doubtful. He quietly put away the file in his hands, but he didn't read it immediately. After returning to the Ministry of Penalty, he came to the empty underground torture room and took out the file and opened it. Wu Xiuxiu was jealous because the business of her restaurant was robbed. The first child Wu Jin doted on his sister, so he came up with a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. With the help of the deadly powder of the Hehuan sect, he set up an unsolvable trap. The file was short, with no more than 1,000 words. The more Chen Gong read, the more shocked he was. The owner of the file seemed to have seen the case with his own eyes. He not only described Wu Jin's motive very clearly, but also pointed out the Hehuan sect that elder brother Xian avoided before. Who was helping him in the dark? Chen Gong frowned. He had no background or special connections. Except for Juyu Winery, he couldn't think of anyone. Is it because my elder brother doesn't want to say it in person, so he tells me in this way? Thinking of this, Chen Gong recovered a little spirit. Whether elder brother Xian helped him secretly or not, With this detailed file, he finally had a chance to argue for Su Li. Without informing Su Li, Chen Gong left the Ministry of Penalty excitedly and headed for the street where the Baiwei building was located. The spy in the dark saw Chen Gong leave and immediately reported to Chu Lu of the Hongyang house. Chu Lu breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's finally done." She had been looking for an opportunity to send the file to Chen Gong. But Chen Gong was also a senior at the peak of the acquired realm. Even if she did it in person, she was not sure. Fortunately, today the spy found that Chen Gong was alone on the street as if he had lost his soul. So, she had a chance. At this time, she didn't know that she was mistaken as a person of Juyu Winery. But she could complete Su Li's task, so she didn't have to be afraid. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. In the past 7 days, Su Li received special information about Chen Gong from Fang Yuan and asked Fang Yuan to do a few small things. For the rest of the time, Chen Gong was busy alone and didn't take her with him. She simply swaggered to practice in the room of the minister of the Ministry of Penalty. That night, she was taken back to the dungeon by Chen Gong and changed into the prison uniform. Chapter 168. On August 14th, the sky was clear. The Mid-Autumn Festival, a very important sacrificial festival of the Dahan country, would be held 1 day later. Yunjing City was full of the lively atmosphere of autumn harvest sacrifice. Only the Ministry of Penalty was cold and solemn from inside to outside. Today was the day when the Ministry of Penalty tried the case of the Baiwei building. In the early morning, many people who heard the news came to the door and stopped to watch. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the main gate of the Ministry of Penalty, which had not been opened for a long time, was suddenly opened by jailers from both sides. With the orderly and heavy footsteps, 2 teams of officers and soldiers with solemn faces came out one by one. The security extended from the trial hall to the people who stopped to watch. After the crowd was in a commotion, Chen Gong in official uniform came out from the back hall and sat behind the high table in the middle. He looked cold and solemn. He raised his eyes and glanced at the people who stopped to watch. Although there was still a yard between them, the sound of the crowd immediately disappeared. "He is Chen Gong. What a terrible momentum." Not many people had seen Chen Gong. At this moment, they suddenly saw him. Although Chen Gong was not as horrible as a ghost with 3 heads and 6 arms as the rumor said, his cold, ruthless and oppressive eyes were enough to frighten people and make them hold their breath. After Chen Gong sat down, another young man came up from the back hall. He had a gentle smile on his handsome face, as if he was a young master who came for an autumn outing. However, the black and golden official robes he wore showed that his status was not lower than Chen Gong's. Ling Qinglan glanced at the people who stopped to watch outside the Ministry of Penalty. He patted his folding fan and sat on the right side of Chen Gong. Then, 2 middle-aged men in blue official uniforms came out from the back hall. They gave a salute to Chen Gong and sat on the left side of Chen Gong. Chen Gong glanced at Ling Qinglan, who was calm and composed. His powerful voice spread through the whole hall. "In the case of the Baiwei building, there are 76 injured and 5 dead. It is of great importance. According to the law of the Dahan country, this case will be jointly tried by 3 departments. It will be tried by me, Ling Qinglan, the officer of the Supreme Judiciary, Kui Ziliang, and Sang He of the Censorate together to show fairness. Because the Su family and the officer of the Supreme Judiciary have an old relationship, the Supreme Judiciary only has the right to speak in this case, but not the right to vote. Do you have any objection?" After that, Kui Ziliang and Sang He immediately got up and replied in unison, "I have no objection." Ling Qinglan's smile remained unchanged. His official rank was the same as Chen Gong's, so he didn't need to salute. He just closed his folding fan and nodded gently. He said with a smile, "Lord Chen, please." Then, "Bring the prisoner." "Wait." Chen Gong was interrupted by a sound from the side door. He frowned and looked over coldly. An old man in his 60s with a face full of wrinkles and wearing a crane official robe walked over with a gloomy expression. There seemed to be other people behind him. Chen Gong's heart sank when he saw him. This person was the victim of this case, Ma Ling's father, Ma Wei Ming, the minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Chen Gong, You blocked me with the law of the Ministry of Justice for half a month, and I didn't even get to see my son. This time, I have received permission from His Majesty to listen from the side. Do you have any objections? As soon as they met, Ma Weiming shouted angrily. Even though there were commoners watching, he didn't give Chen Gong any face. The two imperial censors were slightly shocked, but Ling Qinglan was not surprised at all. Ma Weiming had many descendants, but he only had one son, Ma Ling. Moreover, Ma Ling was his son at the age of 40. He couldn't wait to spoil Ma Ling. Then one day, he suddenly got the news of his son's death. Chen Gong stubbornly blocked him for more than 10 days and let Ma Ling's body be buried in the Ministry of Penalty. It was not easy for him to talk to Chen Gong like this. How dare I not listen to His Majesty's oral order? Come on, bring a seat for Lord Ma. Chen Gong gave an order, and immediately a soldier brought an old-fashioned wooden armchair for Ma Weiming to sit down. He said, Lord Ma, just listen from the side. Don't intervene in the trial. Otherwise, even if it is reported to His Majesty, I will not let go of anyone who dares to despise the law of the Dahan Kingdom. You. Ma Weiming widened his eyes and pointed at Chen Gong, trembling with anger. As a first-rank official, he had never been scolded like this. Even the emperor treated him kindly. This cruel official, whose mind was full of criminal laws. Well, as long as his son's death could be avenged smoothly, he would not argue with him today. Lord Chen, long time no see. Ma Jintian suddenly appeared behind Ma Weiming and said, My father ordered me to listen from the side of the case and try my best to ensure the fairness of the case. Lord Chen, please don't mind. Chen Gong felt it was tricky when one more person came to listen from the side. But he remained calm and snorted coldly, I don't care how many people come to listen from the side. But if you interfere with the trial, don't blame me for being merciless and driving all of you out. Lord Chen, you are the judge of the case. How dare I disturb you? Ma Jintian laughed, and a ray of light flashed in his eyes. Seeing that Chen Gong had no reason to drive Ma Jintian out, Kui Ziliang, who was sitting aside, felt depressed. Why did so many people come before the court started? When he heard the first prince's order, he thought he got a good job. But after he came here, he knew it was not a good job but a deep pool of muddy water. Chen Gong was nervous. When he was about to say something, he heard something from the side door. Ma Jintian looked serious. Was there someone behind him? It shouldn't be. Everyone followed the sound and saw a young servant pushing a wheelchair into the hall of the Ministry of Penalty. The teenager in the wheelchair was disheveled and had an evil smile. It was Ling Li. How could he, a playboy, come to the trial? At this moment, Chen Gong, who was always calm in front of a landslide, was shocked. Except for Ling Qinglan, the others were stunned and couldn't understand it. Ling Qinglan frowned slightly. He paid attention to Su Qingtan these days and didn't have much contact with Ling Li. He didn't know why Ling Li appeared here today. Ling Li raised his eyebrows and said lazily, What? Ma Jintian, can you come here? Can't I come here? My father was the Lord of Zhennan before he died. I am also a little prince. Can't I even have the qualification to listen from the side of the case? Hearing these words, everyone came to a sudden realization. So it was still a competition between the playboys. Ma Jintian's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. He said gloomily, Ling Li, if you make trouble today, even your brother can't save you. He finally offered a plan in front of the Fifth Lord. Today, he came here to implement it. But he didn't expect that Ling Li would make trouble. If he was disturbed by this rascal, how could he go back and tell the Fifth Lord? Chen Gong also frowned and said in a low voice, Ling Li, the Ministry of Penalty is an important place. It's not a place for you to make trouble. Go back quickly. Ling Li touched his ears and said, Don't worry. Lord Ma's son died. How can I not know this? Ma Weiming's mouth twitched, but Ling Li didn't feel it. He continued, I will watch the case and will never make trouble. If I really do something, I will be impotent for the rest of my life. How about that? Everyone was shocked. Did Ling Li mean it? Such a vow was definitely the most poisonous vow to a playboy, but it was quite convincing. Fine, I'll let him stay here. Lord Chen, Let's start the interrogation. Ma Wei-Ming said helplessly. He had no mood to play tricks with the playboy. Since the victim's family had no problem, Chen Gong didn't continue to drive Ling Li away. He shouted, "Bring the prisoners Su Huanli and Su Li up." Ling Li sat on one side and suddenly squinted his eyes. His cold voice sounded in Ling Mo's mind, "How is the preparation?" Ling Mo, who stood behind Ling Li, bowed his head slightly and said, "It has been arranged. Today, the soldiers and jailers inside and outside the court are all our people. In the end, if we want to punish Miss Su, we can save Miss Su without being noticed." Ling Li nodded slightly. He inadvertently glanced at the jailer's queue that extended from the court and sighed in his heart. No matter what the result of the final interrogation was, Su Li must be safe. Otherwise, Ling Qinglan's life would be in danger. When he was thinking, a group of people in white prison uniforms were brought up. Su Li was shackled and followed Su Huanli. "Lord, I'm Su Huanli. I'm wronged." Su Huanli's face was pale. Although he was tortured a little during this time, the torture in his heart was no less than that in torture. He knelt down with a thud. His voice trembled and his body trembled. Su Li also knelt down and said in a timid voice, "Lord, I'm Su Li." Behind him, a group of waiters knelt down. Many of them had bruises and swollen faces. Some of them lost a lot of weight. It seemed that they didn't have a good time in prison. There is a public opinion. I won't let go of any thief or kill any good man by mistake. Chen Gong said lightly. He patted the chopping board and asked in a deep voice, "Su Huanli, what were you doing on the day of the incident?" Su Huanli was shocked and said quickly, "I still run the restaurant as before. The Baiwei building has been open for so many days, but nothing has happened. I still count on the Baiwei building to support my family. How could I poison it? It's unreasonable." Kui Ziliang stood up and sneered, "Those who want to kill don't need to be reasonable. Maybe they felt that there were too few people at the beginning of the business and poisoned it when the business was booming." Su Huanli was stunned when he heard that. He waved his hand in a panic and said, "Lord, please understand. I'm just a businessman. How could I want to kill? You didn't. What about your daughter, Su Li?" Kui Ziliang looked at Su Li with bad intentions and said, "As an imperial censor, I have a good understanding of the case. Su Huanli, both the dishes and the stove design in the back hall of the Baiwei building are designed by your daughter, right?" Yes. Su Huanli nodded blankly. Kui Ziliang immediately succeeded and said, "But you embezzled all the profits of the restaurant. Your son and daughter didn't get any. You didn't even buy a piece of clothing for your daughter. You are so stingy. You did this in the Desu town, and you still did the same in Yunjing. So, your daughter wanted to destroy the Baiwei building with hatred. Am I right? What? Chapter 169. In the hall, it was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. The atmosphere was weird. Everyone had different expressions, but they all focused on Kui Ziliang and Su Li. Kui Ziliang's voice was very loud. His voice passed through the courtyard and fell into the ears of the people watching outside. It immediately caused a commotion. It was Su Li who did it. It's terrible. Su Huanli is her father. Even if he is a little selfish, he doesn't have to kill innocent people to revenge, right? This woman is so vicious at such a young age. She can't be kept alive. She used to be the first talented woman in Yunjing City. People said that she was not only innocent, kind, but also versatile. I almost believed it. Although Su Xiuxiu is arrogant and looks down on the commoners, she is not so vicious. After this incident, it seems that the title of first talented woman in Yunjing City will be returned to Miss Su. It's perfectly justified to pay with one's life. Haha, the master of the Ma family is not a good person. He deserves to die. And a vicious woman is killed. It's so cool. The officers and soldiers who stopped the people were expressionless. They were the most elite spies in the Ministry of Penalty of the Enmore cult. No matter Su Li was a good person or a cruel and merciless villain, they would unconditionally execute the order of the hierarch. Your Excellency, I am wronged. Filial piety is the most important of all virtues. My parents raised me up, which is a great kindness. The Baiwei building is also our property. How can I do such a terrible thing for the Baiwei building? Su Li knelt on the ground. Her weak body was trembling. Her tone was a little flustered because of the influence of Kui Ziliang. But her refutation was very clear. Chen Gong was relieved. If Su Li was really scared and talked nonsense just now, he would be in trouble. Kui Ziliang, pay attention to your tone of interrogation. Are the people in the censorate so unbearable? How can you say inducing interrogation? Ling Qinglan patted his folding fan lightly. His tone was calm but a little aggressive. Kui Ziliang's expression turned ugly for a moment before returning to normal. He cupped his fists and smiled apologetically. Lord Chen, Lord Ling, I was too impatient and was rude. Please forgive me. The beginning of the temple was the time when mortals were most hesitant. He wanted to scare Su Li to succeed with one blow. Even if he didn't succeed, he wouldn't lose anything. If he succeeded, he would make a great contribution. He naturally had to give it a try. Chen Gong had seen through his tricks. He sneered inwardly and said with a solemn voice, "The trial is not a child's play. Kui Ziliang, if there's a next time, I'll kill you. This official can only ask you to leave, understand?" Kui Ziliang's face immediately turned ugly. This Chen Gong was indeed, as the rumor said, a smelly and hard stone, not pleasing at all. Sang He looked at them with a smile and didn't mean to help Kui Ziliang at all. Although they were both imperial censors, they took different paths. Chen Gong sorted out the testimony that he had prepared for the past 7 days, looked up and asked, "Sang He, do you have the testimony for the interrogation?" Sang He immediately got up and said respectfully, "Your Excellency, please start. I will listen on the side. If I have any questions, I will ask you." "All right." Feeling Sang He's kindness, Chen Gong was a little relieved. He ignored Ling Qinglan and said loudly, "Su Li, don't take Lord Kui's words seriously. Now let me ask you, where were you on the day of the crime?" "I was going to the affiliated school of the National Academy as usual. Unexpectedly, I was stopped by the third sister who came in from outside. The third sister said that my father asked me to go to the Baiwei building to help. I hurried there. When I arrived at the Baiwei building, my father told me that several boilers were broken. So, I went to the back to repair them. You know what happened later?" Su Li said slowly. The logic of what happened was extremely clear. Chen Gong nodded frequently and Kui Ziliang looked gloomier. Hearing this, Su Huanli suddenly looked back in amazement and blurted out, "Zipei said that I asked you to go to the Baiwei building?" Su Li was calm in her heart, but she looked confused. "Yes, what happened to my father?" When Su Huanli thought of what Su Zipei and her son did together with Mam Su Kui in the Desu town, he immediately became excited. It must be Zhu Yang who did it. Thinking of this, he kowtowed to Chen Gong and said excitedly, "Lord, I didn't see the third daughter that day. Her name is Su Zipei. She is naughty and likes to make trouble for our family since she was a child. This time, she must have done something secretly." Su Huanli spared no effort to speak ill of Su Zipei. He almost vented his resentment of being locked up for so many days. Chen Gong still looked cold and solemn. He said to the officers and soldiers waiting outside, "Summon Su Zipei to the hall." Chen Gong knew the ins and outs of Su Zipei. However, Su Zipei met the masked man sent by Wu Jin. Even if he summoned her, it would be useless. However, it was not easy for him to explain the origin of the clue. He had to be patient and go through the formalities. After a while, Su Zipei was brought in. Her face was very pale, but she was not flustered. It seemed that she had known that she would be summoned. "I'm Su Zipei. Greetings, Lord." Bang! The chopping board suddenly made a sound. Su Zipei was so scared that her heart skipped a beat. "Su Zipei, why did you lure Su Li into the Baiwei building under the guise of Su Huanli on the day of the incident?" Chen Gong's tone was cold. His expression was completely different from when he interrogated Su Li. He said, "If you dare to lie, you will be punished severely." Su Zipei gritted her teeth fiercely. Under great pressure, she said in a clear voice, I dare not lie. That morning, I didn't go out at all. I just walked around the house and then went back to talk with the second sister. In fact, the second sister told me to say those words to the eldest brother last night in order to make evidence. As soon as the words came out, everyone in the hall changed their faces. Even Su Li's heart slightly sank and her face slightly fluctuated. The more Su Zipei said, the calmer she became. Finally, she even got into the role and said sadly, she said that as long as I said so, she would help me restore the relationship between the eldest brother and me. I agreed without thinking too much. But I didn't expect that the second sister was so crazy that she did such a heartless thing. Kui Ziliang was stunned. Then he was slightly happy and almost couldn't help laughing out loud. He didn't expect that Su Zipei could come up with such a wonderful plan to slander Su Li. Even if Su Li had thousands of mouths, she couldn't explain it clearly. A bunch of nonsense. Chen Gong was shocked and angry. He pounded the table and stood up. He stared at Su Zipei without blinking and said, Su Zipei, do you know the cost of making false evidence according to the law of the Han dynasty? Su Zipei's eyes flashed with panic. But when she thought of what the woman said, she made up her mind. She straightened up her kneeling body and said loudly, Lord, what I said is true. If there is any lie, I'm willing to be struck by lightning. Chen Gong's face was completely gloomy. Kui Ziliang immediately laughed and said, Lord Chen, why are you so angry? Since Su Zipei made such a vicious oath and there is no conflict of interest with the case, her words are 90% credible. In this case, Su Li is lying. The situation is so clear and the evidence is irrefutable. Lord Chen, why don't you convict and close the case? Half a day has passed. We can go back and report. For a moment, the hall was silent. The voices outside the Ministry of Penalty became more and more noisy. What? The case is closed. Have you convicted Su Li? Such a sin should be beheaded in public at 3:00 at noon in order to appease the anger of the people. What's the matter? Should we convict her or not? Isn't Chen Gong an honest and ruthless official? Why is she so indecisive? Chen Gong's back was sweating and his heart could not stop sinking. He was careless. Su Zipei made false evidence and forced Su Li into a dead end. He could not find any reason to continue the interrogation. He clenched a corner of the paper and lamented in his heart. He prepared a stack of paper, but didn't use any of them. Seeing Chen Gong's cold face and silent, Kui Ziliang suddenly smiled and said, It seems that Lord Chen has no objection. In this case, I judge. Su Zipei couldn't help but raise her head and stared at Kui Ziliang with a trace of excitement and expectation in her eyes. Wait. Kui Ziliang was stunned and looked to his side. The one who interrupted him was Sang He, who had never spoken. Lord Kui, why are you so anxious? I think it is rare for the 3 departments to jointly try this case. We should pay more attention to the details. It is unreasonable to close the case so hastily. Kui Ziliang's face immediately turned green. He pointed to Sang He and said angrily, Sang He, what do you mean? Sang He still had a smile on his thin and weathered face. He spread out his hands and said, Lord Kui, why are you angry? I am just judging the matter as it stands. How can we convict her and close the case hastily based on a testimony whose authenticity is uncertain? You. Kui Ziliang stared at him. Before he finished his words, he was interrupted by another person. It turned out to be Ma Wei-Ming, the victim. Su Li and Su Huanli were in front of him. Ma Wei-Ming glanced at them. There was no hatred in his eyes. Instead, he was angry. Lord Kui, I also think there are many strange things in this case. My son's death can't be in vain. We can't let the real murderer get away with it. This case needs to be retried. We can't do it casually. Ma Jintian looked at Ma Wei-Ming in surprise. Where did this old thing get the news? Fortunately, the 7th Lord was wise and his words didn't conflict with Ma Wei-Ming's. Ma Jintian immediately said with a smile, Lord Ma's idea is my idea. Lord Kui, the censorate's investigation is so rough. I am afraid that there are many unjust and wrong cases in these years. Lord Kui, why don't you hand over the cases of these years to the Ministry of Penalty for retrial? Maybe you can get a lot of results. Haha, interesting. Little Pockmark is so eloquent. You really got some of my teachings, Ling Li said lazily. Hearing Ling Li's lazy words, Ma Jintian, who thought he was high-spirited, became angry and said angrily, "Who are you calling little Ma Zi?" Kui Ziliang stared blankly at the sudden change of the situation. He suddenly felt cold. Sang He suddenly changed sides. Why didn't Ma Wei Yiming support him? Instead, he asked Chen Gong to continue the trial. It was completely different from what he expected. The two young masters of the Ma family and the Ling family, who should never be provoked, also spoke for Su Li. Seeing a strange smile on Chen Gong's face, Kui Ziliang suddenly came to his sense. Then he realized that in the entire hall, except for him who wanted to punish the Su family, all the others were against him. Chapter 170. The situation changed so fast that Chen Gong had no time to think. He immediately seized the opportunity and said, "I also don't think it is appropriate. Since both Lord Sang and Lord Wei agree, we will continue to interrogate this case." Su Zipei was in a daze. She was kneeling beside Su Li, but she was like a forgotten rag in the corner. No one looked at her at all. It seemed that what she just said turned a deaf ear to everyone except Kui Ziliang. Why? Su Zipei's eyes were filled with unwillingness. Her fingertips, which were hidden in her sleeves, were clenched so tightly that they turned white. Her body was tense and slightly trembling. The bitterness in her heart seemed to be mixed with more fear. Why? She had done so much, but she still couldn't bring down Su Li. Could it be that the dead witch was right about one thing, that Su Li was born to live? At this time, Chen Gong picked up an old piece of wood on the table and handed it to Sang He for everyone to see. His eyes were clear and his tone was extremely calm. "In fact, I'm 70% sure about the ins and outs of this case. The Su family is not the murderer, but the victim." Hearing this, the people were all in an uproar. Kui Ziliang's heart skipped a beat. Other people's faces also changed slightly. Even Ling Qinglan's expression changed a lot. He glanced at Ling Li secretly, but Ling Li frowned slightly. It seemed that he didn't know it. Didn't Ling Li help? Chen Gong was alone. What could he find? Ling Qinglan's eyes flashed, but he didn't say anything. He took the piece of wood and looked at it carefully. Soon he found that there was a slight burn mark in the middle of the wood. The mark was very fresh. "Lord Chen, can you let me have a look?" Ma Wei Yiming also breathed heavily. He didn't have much hope, but Chen Gong's performance made him have a little confidence in him. "Lord Ma, please." Chen Gong stood up and handed the wood to Ma Wei Yiming. Then he said loudly, "After the autopsy of Ma Ling's body, we got a lot. The poison of Ma Ling and his 4 companions is the same as that of other guests of the Baiwei building, but it is not the same." While Chen Gong was talking, the autopsy standing aside immediately presented a paper for Sang He and Ling Qinglan to see. The autopsy of the Ministry of Penalty was just an ordinary person. Ling Qinglan took the paper casually, but when he saw the words on it, his face immediately changed. 3 poisons mixed, and he died immediately. How could it be detected by an ordinary autopsy? Ling Qinglan raised his head and looked at Chen Gong meaningfully. It seemed that there were people around Chen Gong. Ling Li picked his ears lazily. He didn't need to think to know that it was the poison detected by Su Li. It would be strange if the coroner, who had no kung fu, could find out the deadly powder. Ma Weiming's hands trembled as he read the autopsy report. It was very clear that the other guests of the Baiwei building were poisoned by the mixture of 2 poisons, but his son was poisoned by the mixture of 3 poisons and died immediately. Although he was not a person in the martial arts circle, he also knew that such unpredictable means could not be done by an ordinary restaurant. There must be someone with extraordinary abilities in Jianghu who deliberately participated in it. Chen Gong sat in his original position and said with fervor and assurance, "I personally cut this wood from a square table in the Baiwei building. The burning trace is linear, which is the trace left by the burning of sandalwood. Judging from the burning trace, it was burned on the day of the crime. According to the confession of the waiters, it was the place where Ma Ling sat before he died. So, I speculate that it was Ma Ling who burned the incense and released the poison." What? Ma Weiming stood up and shouted angrily, "It's impossible. How could my son be the murderer? I spoiled him a little, but he didn't have the courage to kill people. I also think it's impossible." Kui Ziliang finally found a chance to interrupt. "Lord Chen, you said that Ma Ling was poisoned with a mixture of strange poisons. It's impossible for ordinary people to master such a strange poison. But don't forget that Su Li is the apprentice of Qi Xianqing, the miracle-working doctor. A doctor is very good at controlling the property of medicine. It's easy for her to poison him. After talking for a long time, it's more and more likely that Su Li committed a crime. Why do you quibble for her?" Chen Gong sneered. "Lord Kui, you repeatedly want an innocent person to confess his crime. What's your intention? Is it because I have touched your sore spot that your dog can't bear it?" Kui Ziliang's expression changed greatly. He was shocked and angry. "Chen Gong, what do you mean? Don't slander me." Seeing that the tension was getting stronger, Sang He immediately stood up to be the peacemaker. "Lord Chen, calm down. Lord Kui, you should also calm down. This trial is conducted by 3 departments, and ordinary people are watching. If it's seen by someone with ulterior motives and made into a rumor, I'm afraid that His Majesty will be furious." Kui Ziliang held his breath slightly. He turned his head and saw a large number of people in Yunjing City pointing at the door. He could only temporarily suppress his anger and sit back. Seeing that, Chen Gong didn't insist and continued to say, "Lord Wei, don't be impatient. Although Ma Ling poisoned Su Li, he is not the murderer." Ma Weiming was stunned when he heard that. Chen Gong shouted at this time, "Call Tang Lei into the court." "Tang Lei? Which Tang Lei?" Ma Jintian looked out in surprise and immediately saw a round fat man walking inside. He looked back at Ling Li, who seemed to be in a trance and couldn't help but pout. He didn't expect that the 3 wastes of Yunjing should get together on this occasion. Ma Weiming was also surprised and thought, "Isn't he the eldest son of Lord Tang? What does he come for?" It was the first time for Tang Lei to come to this kind of occasion. He looked a little nervous. But he was born in an extraordinary family, so his etiquette was considerate. He said, "I'm Tang Lei, Lord Chen." Chen Gong nodded slightly and said, "Tang Lei, tell me in detail what happened between you and Ma Ling." Tang Lei immediately made his conversation with Ma Ling public. He was simple-minded. When he said that, he didn't think that what he said would have a great impact on the situation. He didn't think that he not only represented himself but also the whole Prime Minister Tang's mansion in the eyes of some people. Kui Ziliang's expression finally became extremely gloomy. He even had a trace of resentment against Wu Jin and the first prince. Was this the crime without any loopholes that they said? It was obviously full of loopholes. Ma Weiming's face was gloomy and terrible. He said, "So, my son was instigated by someone to poison Ma Ling and then he was killed?" "Exactly." Chen Gong's tone became more and more dignified. He said, "The source of the 3rd kind of poison is unknown. I guess that when Ma Ling contacted the real murderer, he was secretly poisoned by the real murderer. So, he committed such a tragedy. How dare you? Who is so arrogant?" Ma Weiming was so angry that he pounded the table and stood up. He stayed at home last night. Suddenly, a cold arrow was shot at his bedside, which scared him half to death. There was a note tied to the cold arrow. After he opened it, there was only 1 line of words on it. It said that the first prince was behind the case of the Baiwei building. He thought hard for a night and was dubious. But he didn't want his son to die in vain. Today, he came to listen to the case to confirm it. If even Chen Gong said that the Su family was the real murderer, he would pretend that the note had never appeared. However, what he had heard today had caused his thoughts to lean towards that piece of paper. So much evidence is enough to prove that the Su family is innocent and the victim. Lord Chen, in your opinion, who is the real murderer of this case? Sang He asked with a smile. It seemed that he was not surprised by Chen Gong's words at all. The general situation was settled. Chen Gong showed a faint smile on his face and said in a low voice, "It is extremely difficult to mix the 3 poisons. It can't be controlled by ordinary people. For this reason, I didn't hesitate to contact people in the martial arts circle these days. Finally, I found that the poison in Ma Ling's body was the deadly powder of the Hehuan sect. The Hehuan sect. The deadly powder. Chen Gong's words were full of vigor. Not only did all the people in the hall hear it clearly, but even the common people who were watching outside heard it clearly. Kui Ziliang's expression changed greatly, and he immediately sneered. Ling Li and Ling Qinglan were shocked at the same time. Chen Gong really dared to say it. Su Li lowered her head and frowned slightly. It was not a joke to annoy a ninth-grade sect. It could be imagined that after this public trial, the Su family would no longer be noticed and Chen Gong would replace it. At this moment, he was like a fire in the dark. He could only wait for the devil's claw in the dark to catch him. Was Chen Gong courting death? She thought of the empty walls in Chen Gong's home and the room full of lanterns. She felt more complicated. Su Zipei. It seemed that Chen Gong didn't know that he was in danger. His cold eyes suddenly looked at Su Zipei, who was kneeling beside him, and his voice became colder. Now, do you still insist on making false testimony and killing your sister? If you don't tell the truth, I can only take you as an accomplice of this case and put you in prison. Su Zipei was under pressure like a devil. Su Zipei was so scared that she almost peed. She got up and kowtowed hard. Lord, please forgive me. I was possessed for a moment. In fact, someone asked me to go out that day. It was a masked man. He asked me to say so and gave me 10,000 taels of silver. I thought it was only a matter of one sentence, so I couldn't help it. Later, he found me again and said that if I didn't do as he said, he would put me in prison. I was afraid. You sold your father and sister for 10,000 taels of silver. You are greedy for life and afraid of death. How can Su Li have such a vicious and money-minded sister like you? Chen Gong was angry and couldn't help but ridicule. Except for Su Qingtan, there was no good person in the Su family where Su Li stayed. I won't do it again. Su Zipei burst into tears. Her tears and mucus were overflowing, which was extremely disgusting. A group of waiters who knew that they had been exonerated felt relaxed. They couldn't help but move their bodies with disgust in their eyes. He thought to himself that even if they were to bring an ugly girl home, they would never marry such a vicious girl like Su Zipei. Clap. The gavel rang. Chen Gong stood in front of the desk with a dignified look and said in a loud voice, after 8 days of hard investigation, the real murderer of the Baiwei building case has been found out. It is the Hehuan sect, a force in Jianghu. I will report it to the imperial court and ask for an explanation from the Hehuan sect. Speaking of this, Chen Gong looked at Su Li with gentleness in his eyes. Su Huanli and his family are acquitted. Wow! Chapter 171. At night, in the first prince's mansion. Crack. Dong Fangsheng was so angry that he smashed the file on Wu Jin's face. Then it fell to the ground. Is this the good plan that you said? Huh! Dong Fangsheng was so angry that he almost went crazy. He pointed at Wu Jin and said, at the beginning, you said that this plan was flawless. Now all the people in Yunjing City know that the case was committed by the Hehuan sect. How can I explain it to the people of the Hehuan sect? Wu Jin's respectful expression gradually stiffened. He slowly bent down to pick up the file. His face suddenly became ferocious for a moment. Then he straightened up and recovered his usual calmness. He said in a low voice, Your Highness, there is no need to panic. I have a remedy. What remedy? Child Wu, can you tell me about it? Before Wu Jin finished his words, a sweet female voice came from outside the door. But the emotion in the voice was different from the tenderness in the past. It was full of anger. Dong Fangsheng's heart skipped a beat. He looked up and saw Chu Lu coming with the people of the Hehuan sect. Wu Jin was a little angry. Why did the people of the Hehuan sect come as soon as he mentioned the Hehuan sect? Chu Lu walked to the first prince with a smile on her face, but her eyes were cold and unapproachable. She curtsied and said, Your Highness, I pay my respects to the first prince. Dong Fangsheng forced a smile and hurriedly came over to help Chu Lu up. He said, What brings you here today? I'm really surprised. Chu Lu took a step back without a trace and said with a slight smile, In my opinion, The first prince must be frightened a lot, right? Dong Fangsheng's expression changed slightly. He didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't expect that Chu Lu was so disrespectful. She even didn't pretend to be harmonious. Lady Chu, please pay attention to your words and deeds. This is the first prince of the Dahan country and the future crown prince of the Dahan country. Even the emperor, Wu Jin, stood up to speak for Dong Fangsheng. The seniors of the Hehuan sect behind Chu Lu immediately sneered. Chu Lu walked over to Dong Fangsheng with light steps and giggled, "I didn't want to blame you, but from your attitude, it seems that I have done something wrong. What's the reason?" Hearing this, Dong Fangsheng's face suddenly changed. He turned around and said angrily, "Wu Jin, shut up." Wu Jin held his breath and clenched his fists that were hidden in his sleeves. He could barely suppress his anger. His face turned green and red, which was wonderful. Seeing that Wu Jin held back, Dong Fangsheng breathed a sigh of relief. As far as he knew, the third prince had already cooperated with the Lianxia cult. If he lost the help of the all-pleasure sect now, his chances of winning the title of crown prince would be even slimmer. "Your First Highness, before you used the life-extinguishing powder, you promised me that you would never reveal the existence of the all-pleasure sect. But now, how do you explain it?" Chu Lu's eyes were burning, and her tone was full of oppression. No one could imagine that she was the thief who cried "Stop thief." "I have indeed failed to consider this matter thoroughly." Dong Fangsheng suppressed his irritation and said sincerely, "I didn't expect that Chen Gong had the means to find out the life-extinguishing powder, and it was related to the martial arts circle." "Your First Highness, do you mean that the life-extinguishing powder of the all-pleasure sect is wrong?" Chu Lu's eyes were cold. Dong Fangsheng was flustered and quickly waved his hand. No, I don't mean that." Wu Jin stood aside with no expression. He knew very well what the all-pleasure sect was planning, but at this moment, he had no idea to remind Dong Fangsheng. Seeing that the first prince was so humble, all the people of the all-pleasure sect couldn't help but feel complacent. Of course, they didn't come here to cut off contact with the first prince. Now their purpose had been achieved. Chu Lu covered her mouth and chuckled. She became charming again and said, "Since the first prince is still sincere, I will give you another chance. However, I am afraid that the agreement made by the first prince and the all-pleasure sect needs to be changed." The first prince was shocked and finally realized that the purpose of the all-pleasure sect was different from what he thought. But now he was in a weak position and there was no room for regret. "Lady Chu, how do you want to change it?" The first prince took a deep breath and asked aloud. He was ready to be slaughtered. An hour later, Chu Lu arrogantly left with all the people of the all-pleasure sect, leaving the first prince with a livid face. Soon after, there was a sound of things being smashed in the room. It was late at night. Wu Jin left with uncertainty in his eyes. There were many forces who wanted to fight for the throne. He wouldn't put all his efforts on one person. Su Li and Su Huanli returned home. Except for Mammy Li, who came out to greet them happily, they didn't see Su Qingtan. When they got off the carriage, Su Huanli didn't look at Su Li and left in a hurry. He was extremely tired. Now he just wanted to have a good sleep and couldn't care about anything else. After Mammy Li got the news, she had prepared a large table of sumptuous meals for Su Li. "Miss, it's not good in prison, right? Look, you have lost weight." Su Li smiled slightly and didn't answer. Except for the first day and last night, she lived in the Chen Palace. How could she suffer? "Mammy, where is eldest brother?" After eating a mouthful of food, Su Li put down the chopsticks and asked. "Oh, I just waited for Miss and didn't pay attention to him." Mammy Li patted her thigh and said strangely, "However, First Master didn't come back from the Supreme Judiciary these days. It seems that he has been very busy." "Really?" Ling Qinglan's face appeared in Su Li's mind. She nodded slightly and said, "In this case, I will ask him tomorrow. It's worrying that he doesn't go home without saying a word." "Hey, Miss, you have to take care of yourself first. First Master must be delayed by something." Mammy Li couldn't help but exhort. Although she knew some secrets of Su Li, she subconsciously regarded Su Li as a kind girl who only thought about others. This was the inherent mode of getting along with Su Li. It couldn't be changed easily. Su Li responded and said with a smile, "Mammy, you should have an early rest." Hey. It was a quiet night. Early the next morning, Su Li took a car to the Supreme Judiciary. At this moment, she had restored her identity as a lecturer of the affiliated school. After explaining her purpose, the guard at the door didn't dare to stop her and quickly let Su Li in. As soon as she approached Ling Qinglan's office, Su Li sniffed gently and frowned unconsciously. She sensed a faint chill floating in the air. According to Ling Qinglan's injury, he shouldn't be so serious. Miss Su Li's sudden visit really flatters me. When Su Li was thinking, Ling Qinglan came out of the study with a folding fan. His face was ruddy and he smiled faintly. He didn't look like a person who was terminally ill at all. Su Li stopped thinking and opened her red lips slightly. Her soft voice came into Ling Qinglan's ears. "Lord Ling, I am Su Li. I want to ask why my brother didn't go home for many days." He didn't reply. "I am really worried." Ling Qinglan smiled warmly and said, "I see. Miss Su Li, don't worry. There is indeed an urgent case in the Supreme Judiciary and we need someone to collect evidence. I think Su Qingtan is restless because of your case. I am afraid that he will do something impulsive, so I sent him to a distant place. I forgot to send a message to your family." "I see. Thank you." Lord Ling. Su Li was enlightened and said gratefully. But she was a little vigilant in her heart. Ling Qinglan was lying. Since she let Fang Yuan contact Chu Lu, the shortcoming of intelligence had disappeared. The Supreme Judiciary was also a force that Chu Lu observed. Recently, there was no urgent case in the Supreme Judiciary at all. There was no case that needed to send someone to collect evidence. She quietly looked over Ling Qinglan and fell on the study behind him. She always cared about the chill. Thinking of this, Su Li smiled and said, "I have never been to the Supreme Judiciary. Lord Ling, can you take me to the study to have a seat?" Ling Qinglan slightly stopped smiling and said, "Miss Su Li is a natural beauty. It is difficult for me to refuse your request. But the Supreme Judiciary is the place to handle cases. There are many files in the study, which are all confidential. I am willing but unable to do so. I can only let Miss Su Li down." "Ah, I just asked casually. Lord Ling, don't worry about it." Su Li repeatedly waved her hands and said apologetically, "Since I got the news from the eldest brother, I will go back first." "Lord Ling, goodbye." Ling Qinglan replied with a hum and didn't forget to remind her with a smile, "Be careful on the way." Su Li turned her back and her face instantly became calm. There must be something strange in Ling Qinglan's study. But it was daytime now. Ling Qinglan was a senior of the inborn realm and lived in the Supreme Judiciary. If he wanted to explore the study, he needed to make a long-term plan. Seeing Su Li's back, Ling Qinglan's smile almost disappeared at the same time. His intuition told him that Su Li seemed, not necessarily as easy to fool as she looked. He didn't care about it in the Qinghe province. But this time, in the case of the Baiwei building, she also inexplicably avoided danger. He couldn't help feeling strange. Ling Li suddenly went to audit the case. "I don't know if it has anything to do with her," Ling Qinglan muttered to himself in a low voice. He was very clear about Ling Li's temperament. Ling Li was a person with a strong purpose. If Ling Li didn't show enough wisdom and intelligence at that time, Ling Li might not save him at all. When he didn't know Ling Li, he was full of contempt and disdain when he looked at Ling Li. But later he thought that Ling Li also looked at him as if he was looking at garbage at that time. "It's a pity that I have to keep an eye on Su Qingtan. Otherwise, I must ask him what benefits Su Li has." With a sigh, Ling Qinglan walked back to the study. Su Qingtan was at a critical moment, so he couldn't leave. Achoo! In the Ling mansion, Ling Li sniffed and felt strange. Who on earth was talking about him? Ling Xian, what the hell is Ling Qinglan doing recently? I haven't seen him for many days. Ling Xian chuckled and said, "Master Qinglan has always been like this. Tomorrow is the Mid-Autumn Festival. He will definitely come to spend the festival with Madame Dowager and Madame Dowager. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, it will be the annual autumn hunting." Ling Li's eyes flickered and he said, "Last year, I was at a critical moment of practice, so I didn't join in the fun. This year, I have to see who is the unlucky guy. Ling Xian's beautiful eyes flashed with light. Chapter 172. After leaving the Supreme Judiciary, Su Li changed her appearance to that of a young man who met Chu Lu in the Hongyang house that day. Then she came to the street where the Linli building was located. It was the 15th day of the 8th lunar month again. Lanterns were hung in front of every household. Although the alley was secluded, children could be seen playing on the street. Poor people squatted by the door and picked vegetables while watching their children. The scene reflected in Su Li's eyes made her feel a little warm. After watching for a moment, Su Li glanced at the proprietress of the Juyu winery who came out with a bucket of swill. She immediately calmed down and stepped into the Linli building which had been opened. When Su Li saw the proprietress also noticed Su Li. The proprietress poured out the swill and looked back to see the high-rise building whose door was wide open. An obscure light flashed in her eyes. She scolded, "What a spendthrift. It's okay that the winery is remote. It's better to use the money to buy a good land than to build a high-rise building." The shabby scholar staggered to the door with a flagon. He was half drunk and half awake. He rolled his eyes and said, as long as it doesn't affect our business, why do you care so much about others?" The lady boss shook her sturdy shoulders and slammed the bucket of swill onto the ground. She turned around and scolded, "I'm just nagging you, and you're getting all worked up. You bastard, are you itching for a beating again?" It seemed that the shabby scholar didn't hear the proprietress's words at all. He closed his eyes and sniffed with an intoxicated look. He said, "The wine is so fragrant. When did our wine become so fragrant? Damn drunkard, where does the fragrance come from?" The proprietress's big round face showed a strange expression. She said, "The fragrance of Osman thus can be smelled in the morning." "Which family's Osman thus blooms?" "Hair. No, the smell." The shabby scholar suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were bright. He sniffed like a dog smelling the smell. He went out of the winery and arrived at the door of the Linli building in a blink of an eye. "Hey, you damn scholar, you don't drink your own wine but take care of the business of the neighbor. Come back." The shabby scholar was drunk at the moment, but he didn't care about the shouts of his wife behind him. He rushed into the Linli building regardless of the consequences. The Linli building had just opened, and it was very quiet at the moment. The shabby scholar stood at the door and looked at the exquisite and unostentatious decoration. He sighed, "What a rich family. It's all made of money. Sir, what would you like to order? The wine of the Linli building is unique in the world. There is no other branch." Yin Xuetong came forward with a smile and asked, but she was not calm inside. In front of her was a senior in the inborn realm. She didn't know whether the elixir given by Su Li was effective or not. She just took it for less than a quarter of an hour. "Linli building. Good name." The shabby scholar praised loudly and said in a carefree manner, "Drinking wine is for one to be happy and to one's heart's content. It seems that this girl is the boss of the Linli building. I didn't expect that she also has the same interest." The shabby scholar didn't see anything. Yin Xuetong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Su Li's attainments in the elixir circle had reached the acme of perfection. Since the scholar in front of her couldn't see anything, she didn't need to worry about exposing her cultivation and identity as long as she didn't meet a senior in the longevity realm above the inborn realm. Thinking of this, Yin Xuetong made a salute and said modestly, "Sir, you misunderstood me. I'm just the shopkeeper of the inn. My master is the owner of the winery." It turned out to be so. The shabby scholar was suddenly enlightened. He found a table and sat down. His hands touched the smooth mirror-like table, and his face was full of enjoyment. This was a good rosewood. "Sir, what kind of wine do you want?" Yin Xuetong's smile remained unchanged, but she secretly muttered in her heart. Was this person really the senior in the inborn realm that Su Li mentioned? How could he have such a poor and pedantic look that he had never seen the world? Speaking of wine, the shabby scholar suddenly remembered the business. He subconsciously looked at the wooden sign hanging behind the cabinet. Then his face suddenly turned green. "Osman thus wine. The wine is mellow, sweet and not greasy. First class Osmanthus wine, 100,000 taels per jar. Second class Osmanthus wine, 1,000 taels per jar. Third class Osmanthus wine, 100 taels per jar. Liehua wine. The heart and lungs are as fierce as fire. The wine is so mellow that one drop of it is intoxicated. First class Liehua wine, 50,000 taels per jar. Second class Liehua wine, 500 taels per jar. Third class Liehua wine, 50 taels per jar. Osmanthus cake, fried peanuts, beef. The shabby scholar's eyes widened. Ordinary dishes with wine were not much different from the price of other restaurants. But what was the matter with those two kinds of wine? Even the lowest third-grade wine was several times more expensive than the best wine in a normal restaurant. It was a scam. It was a blatant scam. The shabby scholar looked nervous and couldn't wait to rush out of the door. But his house was next door, and they would meet each other frequently in the future. He couldn't do that. He hid a little money, but it was only 5 taels. He couldn't even afford a pot of wine. Smelling the increasingly strong fragrance of the wine, the shabby scholar swallowed and rubbed his hands. He asked wretchedly, "Well, shopkeeper, on the first day of your winery's opening, don't you even have a discount? Look, your wine is so expensive. No one dares to buy it." Yin Xuetong's smile froze on his face. He couldn't believe it. Would a senior above the inborn realm be short of wine money? Treat him as an ordinary drinker and explain the purpose. Suddenly, Yin Xuetong transmitted the sound in silence. He immediately came to his sense and pointed to the wine jar which had been unsealed at the door. He smiled solemnly and said, "My master said that good wine fears no dark alley. If someone is proficient in wine, he can know that the wine sold by the Leanly building is absolutely good just by smelling the fragrance of the wine." Only then did the shabby scholar see a row of wine jars at the door. His eyes suddenly turned green. He couldn't wait to take a jar and leave. But the reason in his mind still stopped him. He sighed and said, "The fragrance of the wine is strong, and it is fragrant for 10 miles. How can a drinker not know good wine?" He also knew that it was good wine, but he couldn't afford it. Yin Xuetong saw that the time was right. She immediately smiled and said, "You don't need to feel pity. Today, you are the first guest to come to the Leanly building. My master said that if a neighbor comes to ask for wine, he should give a pot of wine. Please wait for a moment. I will go down to prepare dishes for you." The shabby scholar was shocked and then overjoyed. He quickly got up and walked to the door. Yin Xuetong was so scared that she stepped back a few steps. She was surprised. Was the senior so noble that she didn't even take advantage of a pot of wine? "Shopkeeper, wait a moment. My wife is also a wine lover. Wait for me to call her over. The wine must be counted according to the number of people, right? It would be impolite to refuse." Ha 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 ha. Yin Xuetong stared blankly at the shabby scholar who left hurriedly. She had never seen such a shameless person. He even took advantage of others with him. Su Li hid upstairs. When she saw this scene, she couldn't help but smile. She said to Chu Qingning, who was dressed as a waiter beside her, "Prepare a pot of Liehua spirits and a pot of Osmanthus wine. Serve the Osmanthus cake." Chu Qingning had a strange look on his face and muttered, "A poor scholar who likes to take advantage of others and a middle-aged woman. Su Li, do you recognize the wrong person?" Fang Yuan nodded in agreement. Except for the underground additum, they had lived here for several months. They had never noticed any abnormality of the couple next door. Every day, they worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. It was extremely ordinary. Su Li glanced at Fang Yuan and asked, "In the inborn realm, there is a way in the heart. It is also an obsession. Fang Yuan, what is your way? What is the obsession in your heart?" Suddenly being asked, Fang Yuan was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Su Li's clear eyes. His face tightened and he immediately looked away. How could he say that kind of obsession out? Seeing Fang Yuan's reaction, Su Li felt quite strange, but she didn't ask again. Hate and love are both obsessions. After the inborn realm, it becomes the way of refining the mind. Although Qi Xianqing, the miracle-working doctor, practiced medicine to save the world, his obsession was only his sect, so he had countless disciples. The inborn seniors of the Lianxia cult are all desires in their hearts. So, They still have a clear mind despite the blood in their hands. Fang Yuan became more and more silent when he heard the words. Chu Qingning didn't understand, but he finally figured out what Su Li wanted to say. You mean, the way that the couple took? Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and said, the way of the mortal world is not for everyone. If the warrior was powerful, the desire in his heart would expand. He longed for wealth, power, and more powerful strength. All these would lead to the warrior losing his original heart. This was why so many sects looked at the secular world with contempt and disdain. They thought that they were superior and could control life and death. Ordinary people were nonentities. After becoming a superior person, who would want to return to the previous life of nonentities? Chu Qingning looked down at the couple, one thin and one fat, who came in at the door. They were really like ordinary people. He couldn't help but sigh that they were really not easy to deal with. Thinking of this, he immediately went downstairs to prepare the dishes. Downstairs, the fat proprietress sat at the table and touched the smooth tables and chairs lovingly. Her eyes were shining. She really wanted to move a set back to sit. Seeing that the lobby was empty and the waiter didn't serve the dishes for a long time, the proprietress couldn't help but lower her voice and ask, "Husband, did you deliberately deceive me just now? Such an expensive restaurant, we can't afford to lose our own winery." "Hey," the shabby scholar interrupted, "the shopkeeper just told me personally. How can it be false? Hey, look, it's here now." Then he saw Chu Qingning, who came out of the back hall with a plate. His eyes suddenly brightened. "Dishes are served. These are the Liehua spirits and Osmanthus wine given by our master to you. Please enjoy." Chu Qingning quickly set up the dishes and wine pot, and was about to go down after shouting. The shabby scholar couldn't wait to pour a glass of wine and pour it into his mouth. But the proprietress grabbed the wine glass in his hand and shouted, "Take care, young man." Chu Qingning looked back doubtfully. What else do you need? He despised them in his heart. Did they want to take some back to drink? Even if they followed the mortal world, they couldn't be so shameless. The proprietress squeezed a smile on her face and asked in a gentle voice, "I want to ask why there are no other waiters in such a big winery. It's so lonely." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.